Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Mercy, nice to see you again. Jasper Patterson Astamex, welcome on in. So yesterday on our stream, we reacted to a video about localization featuring Asmongold and Rev Uwu, and that actually took a lot longer than I ever anticipated it would have to go through the video, but there's a lot to say about it. So rather than continuing on that subject, I figured it'd be a good change of pace to switch directions a bit. And today we'll be covering From Software's Design Has a Big Problem by Assad Anjum, I think. I probably should have watched the video a little bit to see if he pronounces this. So hopefully I didn't butcher it too poorly there. Then after that, I figured we could keep on going on the negative train with the worst mistake in FromSoft history hyphen Bloodborne. So I don't know if this dude is saying Bloodborne is the worst mistake. If so, that'll be really funny, hopefully, and or entertaining. And then finally, we will get to Why Does Dark Souls Sound Like Dark Souls by 8-Bit Music Theory. And depending on how much time after that, I thought I had another one after this. We might do Radagon, Misbegotten Champion, and or something else, I think. Oh yeah, I was thinking about putting Bloodborne, Bloody Dark Souls, Zero Punctuations review by The Escapist, which is kind of what I mentioned, I think last week on stream, that we had another one by this, group. Which is going to be kind of interesting to look back at it after all of the somewhat recent controversy surrounding that production studio. I don't know what to call it, but anyway, yeah. Vacua Zealot, welcome back to the stream. Stella, Errant Vice, Elden Enthusiast, nice to have all of you guys again. Do you feel as though the saying "no tree can reach heaven unless its roots reach down to hell" perfectly describes the Erd Tree? I've never heard that saying before, to be honest, but that's a very interesting one, and maybe I don't know, just because when you do fight the Elden Beast, you got all the other types of Erd trees maybe that could be reaching across the cosmos. So yeah, I just don't know how far down its roots go. Well, and of course that comes down to the metaphysical side of things, the cosmos and darkness and souls being related to that. So maybe, but I don't know exactly what the hell in the Elden Ring universe would be beyond the whole Mogwin, Mother of Truth type aesthetic. Jesse R., welcome back. Nice to see you again. You mean below Langdell there are sewers and what the Golden Order did to people? Yeah, but to be fair, the roots extend even further down below that to Deeproot. And certainly there is some messed up stuff that goes into fertilizing the Erd Tree. So they kind of manufacture their own hell. So, hey Cantrell, nice to see you again. And the Lands Between wasn't the world overall. It might be, it might not. There could be the weird I don't know how to pronounce this word, cosmogony, cosmogony, in which it could be potentially more parallel to Norse mythology, where you have the Yggdrasil extending through Niflheim and down into Hell with one L, and I'm blanking on the name of some of the other realms right now. I'm thinking of Surtur, the giant's name, but that doesn't make sense. Anyway, hopefully you guys get what I mean. I would probably need to see the picture to remember what exactly I'm talking about. The tree reaches the sky, and aren't the sky and the cosmos one? Yes, but also the sky and the cosmos exist within the Oracle's bubbles. And not just the Oracle bubbles, but I mean the Clayman bubbles. Cantrell says, even with the Eastern lands being mentioned. So I think it's important to note that what's the name of the Confessor set? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the Confessor set. I don't need to know about Crepus. So the churches outside the Lands Between, dedicated to the teachings of the Two Fingers, send confessors out to follow the guidance of grace. So if you think of the Lands Between as a continent, that's all well and good. there's certainly enough reason to believe that. Although I tend to think that the Lands Between is probably more analogous to something like the Nexus in Demon Souls or Things Betwixt in Dark Souls 2, because it's kind of like it got that similar language going on in that some of the tarnished needed to cross like the Sea of Fog to return to it, and it's like kind of a metaphysical thing in general, maybe. I don't know. It's a little bit weird. So I think within the Lands Between, there's probably a whole idea of a world which may or may not include like the Land of Reeds or the Badlands. But I also think it's possible it's that like you could kind of cross realms and not dimensions per se, but like realms in that um some of the churches outside the Lands Between could be in the realms that are like beyond the Sea of the Fog that might not be literal continents, because we've got the descriptions referring to the Newman as kind of aliens, but not like extraterrestrial ET aliens, but like visitors from afar. So kind of aliens, but just like not little green men, essentially. But yeah, these are all really interesting questions. Hey, Aaron Weiss, thank you so much for the 5. I appreciate that. Great holes secretly are digged where the earth's pores ought to suffice, and things have learned to walk that ought to crawl. Thank you. What is that quote from, if you don't mind elaborating? Spoonbender, nice to see you again. One thing that really grinds my gears about these games is they show off all these cool castles or areas, and it feels like we only get to a tiny piece of the pie to explore. Well, the good thing about Elden Ring is pretty much whatever you can see, you can visit, with very few exceptions, like the ships that you can see way off in the horizon in like the Radagon arena. So pretty much anything that's like not in the sea or the ocean is mostly fair game. Cantrell says, with God, was it Godwin the Golden? There seemed to be a different realm his fish corpse was in, given his dragon buddy entered his dream. So yeah, I don't know if I would call like the dreams realms, although there is a certain rationale in saying like the dreamlands are kind of their own realm or like their own dimension. So yeah, that could be one example of it, and it's just very unclear where exactly the Elden, or sorry, not the Elden Ring, but the Lands Between fits in between the other places we've heard about, because the Newman's land is not supposed to exist within the Lands Between, but the way that I think the text is trying to come across is like alien style rather than foreign style. I don't know if that makes sense. It's from the festival, but Signalis has psyoped the world into thinking it's from King in Yellow. Okay, thank you. Wrath of the Gods is a true tragedy. It was a busted spell in DS1, but was terrible in 3 and mediocre in Elden Ring. Yeah, when did I... Oh, I'm thinking of something else. I was thinking of Lords in the Fallen for a second. I was like, yeah, I really wanted it to be good to knock opponents off the ledges, but then I was thinking of a completely different game. So yeah, I haven't really messed around with the Wrath of Gold in Elden Ring to know if it's decent or not, but I could imagine it could have some uses in a place like Castle Stormvale or the Halig Tree, but I don't know how effective its knockback is, and it sounds like it's not that great. Okay, so thank you all for the lovely comments. Let's go ahead and dive into our first video of the day with From Software's Design Has a Big Problem by Assad Anjum, I hope.
From Software has a pretty good case for being the single best game developer in the world right now. They're popping Game of the Years like they're Tic Tacs. Everything they produce has unmatched level design, bosses, combat, lore.
When you said Tic Tacs, I was like, that's not how you write TikTok. And I'm like, oh my god, he actually means Tic Tacs. Oh man, my brain has just been hijacked. Okay, I'm gonna back it up.
Pretty good case for being the single best game developer in the world right now. They're popping Game of the Years like they're Tic Tacs. Everything they produce has unmatched level design, bosses, combat, lore, and creativity, and they've been at the top of their game for over a decade. They've made some of my favorite games ever, And I love them. Look, I drew a little picture. Look how cute we are. But, like everything you love, it's always a good idea to describe in vivid detail the things you hate about them and wish they would change and make them less desirable overall, especially when it's a core fixture of their personality. Ever since the Soul genre took off, FromSoft games have had the unofficial title of tough but fair. That was how a lot of people lured others into this series. Yes, these games are tough, but they are fair, so you can beat them. But while I obviously agree with the last part of that statement, the more I thought about it, the more I wondered, wait, but like, are they? And in some ways, yeah, they are. The combat follows a rigid set of rules. You can react to most things on the fly as long as you have your wits about you, and if you do get caught off guard, you always have the chance to try again with more knowledge of what you're going up against. But in other ways, no. I don't think these games are always fair, and the more polished quality of life updates and
So, I mean, he might get into this a little bit further in the video, but I think the question of fairness comes down to like one of those design philosophies of, should a player realistically be able to defeat a boss on their first try? And if not the first try, then like how many numbers of tries is the acceptable number? Which is kind of a really funny question to ask, because now I'm just like having this snapshot slideshow go through my head of like all the streamers who've like failed to take down Orphan of Kos, and they're on like attempt number 600, you know? So yeah, that's kind of a one size doesn't fit all kind of question, isn't it? Hey, Mercy, thank you so much for the 100 kronar again. Soul of the mind, key to life's ether, soul of the lost, withdrawn from its vessel. Let strength be granted so the world might be mended, so the world might be mended. Thank you. There's a dodge button. What more do you need? Iframes on the dodge, I guess. So yeah. And I was also thinking about that with the whole Radon meteor. Generally, it's fair that if you get crushed by a freaking meteor, it's gonna hurt, you know. But on a more realistic note, there are ways to mitigate a lot of the things that the games throw at you, and Elden Ring surprisingly has a get out of dodge card in that one Ash of War that essentially negates all damage for a very brief period of time. I can't remember its name because I'm too cool to use something like that, but not really. So yeah, I know like you guys probably know what I'm talking about. Apparently it's almost like necessary to try to like no hit Rykard or whatnot. So yeah, anyway. Is this like a problem? Like I think they are fair, but it just takes a little bit of pattern recognition. So I assume this guy is going to go into it in more detail, but I think this is a, pun intended, I suppose, fair question to ask as well.
modernization they received, the more that lack of fairness, which once felt like more of a byproduct of the grungy, scruffy charm of the series, feels more like a problem than a feature. And I think that becomes really evident when you see how frantically From rescales weapons and nerfs bosses post-release, something that they've always kind of done to some capacity, but it seems especially haphazard now. And just to clarify for some people who might be new here, and
I don't know if this is like a YouTube thing or if it's like his video, but it seems like the frames stop for like half a second at a time. It's kind of distracting me. A Spoonbender says you don't know why everyone's complaining about Mikola. You one-shot her your first try. Man, my man's already got the DLC and is fighting Mikola. Feels bad. Vice says, you feel like the Radon meteor is meant to kill you, to be honest. Like, it's something you cannot react dodge to. You have to be on torrent to not get greened by it. Or if you just, like, run away from it. I think Zoli the Witch had a video where she showed off that Leonard will run to a certain spot and then Radon will go to where Leonard is. So it can be telegraphed well, although I don't ever remember like looking at where Leonard goes and whatnot. So I actually pressed play a couple of seconds ago because I noticed YouTube was being its weird self, and it still hasn't started playing again. I might have to refresh it because the last time I threatened to do that.
but it seems especially
Interesting. So this is like what happened the other day where it like froze, and then as soon as I took it out of full screen, it acted properly. Okay, I'll just remember that for the future, I suppose. God dang it.
hazard now. And just to clarify for some people who might be new here and don't know
Why? All right, I think I am just gonna refresh after.
my gamer credentials, I've played
All right, that's just silly. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm sure it's other people in my nearby area that are causing this problem. YouTube, get out
From
of
Software
here.
has a pretty good case for being the
No,
single
I should
best
have looked at the time. Wait. On my screen? Nope. Too late. Tough but fair. Maybe if I
that came out
maximize
kinda in the
now.
middle. Dark
Oh my
Souls
god,
3
it
and
actually
Sekiro
works. Okay.
really hit
Is it our lot in life to suffer? Global Sequence, welcome into this stream. Is that Joel Haver on your thing? I can't tell. Radon returns to wherever he took off from and flies in from wherever the host was facing, if you remember correctly. Yeah, I mean, it just. The way that it always felt to me was that he was just kind of always in very close proximity to where he was when he took off, and that was typically near the player. Please donate me more DKK so I can afford better internet. I know, right?
game Elden Ring bosses
I don't even think it's the internet. It feels exactly like a YouTube thing because like my stream is okay. It's just Chrome or YouTube or something.
everyone shat on for being poorly.
And the worst thing is I'm paying for premium too, a premium service. Okay.
Unfair some of them can be. I sometimes self-inflict even more unfair rules on myself because I'm a legitimate psychopath. I like the late game Elden Ring bosses that everyone shat on for being poorly balanced, so before you call me a little beta boy who's complaining about the difficulty, 1, I still beat it, so cry about it, nerd, and 2, I'm not even complaining, okay? I'm analyzing. Which is the same thing, it's just more pretentious. In my opinion, From Software's fairest difficulty curves are in the games that came out kinda in the middle. Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro really hit the sweet spot. Even though Sekiro is hard as shit, there's nothing that stands out as uncharacteristically difficult out of nowhere. We're gonna talk a little bit about some of the ways they managed to do that and how the next games didn't in a sec, but first, let's quickly touch on the 3 Souls games that came out before them.
I do think Sekiro has some very large spikes in difficulty, with Genichiro being one, Snake Eyes, Shirafuji, and Shirahagi being other ones, like the little snipers that just randomly are mini bosses and can kick your ass. Those are pretty big spikes in difficulty, and Guardian Ape are like probably the biggest spikes in difficulty. Most people don't have issues with Masataka Oniwa Gyobu, whatever his name is. Oh, I forgot the meme name, Sumi. And I know the Raging Bull can really throw some people off, and Ocho Dono is also pretty difficult, but those are kind of also like the first bosses, but they all kind of have an equivalent level of difficulty, I think, overall, whereas I think Genichiro is hands and like head and shoulders above those introductory bosses. Hey, Rat, welcome on in. Oh, you're telling me about horrible internet. So, for anybody who doesn't know, which I'm going to assume is most of you guys, Rat was from Alaska and was notorious for his bad internet. And even when he's moved to other places, he's brought his bad internet with him. So, I don't believe him. Thank you so much, Mercy, for the extra hundo. I really appreciate that. Yobu Masataka on. It's not Masataki, it's Masataka. I remember that much. Okay. Thank you, though. I appreciate that. And Nightbot calling me out. Bro, why? This is what I get for pausing the videos, apparently. Methoda, nice to see you again. You really loved Sekiro more than any FromSoft game except Bloodborne, but you know you're in the minority. So as far as like an action game goes, I do think Sekiro is a really, really good game, but it's not necessarily the type of game that I'll always seek out for myself. All right, I'm going to do like a hard refresh.
Actually,
228. I remembered. That was F4, not F5. I can't say I fat fingered it, but it's almost equivalent. Oh, okay, sweet. It kept it over here. Now, Control F5, just to be safe.
Actually, you know what? Everyone already knows that Dark Souls 2 suffers from bad hitboxes and that weird iframe system, and Demon Souls was still clearly just ironing out some kinks. So let's focus on Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1 is one of the most mechanically consistent in this family of games. It's very predictable once you have a knowledge of the systems, and as a counterweight to make it more difficult, it tries to limit that knowledge by introducing a steady stream of new ideas and sometimes obscuring old ones. This is a really good solution that's unfortunately incredibly easy to overstep with. For instance, mimics are an example of doing this well. If you know nothing about the game when you first start playing it, the first mimic will almost definitely trick you and kill you. But after that point, you know to be careful with chests. You learn at some point that you can hit any chest before you open it to test if it's a mimic, and you might even realize that the way that the chain is pointing, or even the fact that the chest is lightly breathing, are other ways to identify these little homages to British dentistry. The rules are now set, and they're unwaveringly followed. The same goes for any section where an enemy rolls a boulder down a staircase or sets a bridge on fire. You might not know immediately that that's going to happen, but when you make your way back, you now know to hang back for a second before walking forwards. On the other hand, where the game goes overboard is by trying to throw you off from what you've already learned until this point with ham-fistedly implemented level design. And I know, even just saying that sentence has the potential to incur the wrath of 1,000 neckbeards or unleash an ancient curse that kills 3 random gamers from Des Moines. I get it, okay? This game is beloved in no small part because of its bold level design, and it's arguably the thing that the studio does best. But enough time has passed. Okay, we can be honest with each other here, right? We're at that point in our relationship. I feel like some of these levels and boss arenas worked really well, but some of them didn't. Realistically,
Yeah, even like the sound seems off. Man, I think this has to be a YouTube thing. Yeah, nobody else is like commenting about it, so all right, let's hopefully see if that fixed it. Mr. Yada, hey, how's it going? FromSoft's biggest design problem is that they don't design games fast enough. Feels bad, man. Everybody is theming for the DLC. One of my favorite clips on the internet in recent memory is just Ratatosker laughing his ass off at Zeostorm being just like crestfallen that there was no trailer announcement or anything at the Video Game Awards for the DLC.
is it fair that at one point you're tasked with fighting a boss on a staircase with 2 dogs attacking you in a confined space when the game has a feature where your swing can be interrupted by walls? Even if you know what you're in for with the boss eventually, this combat system and this attack interrupt mechanic were not designed to work effectively in an arena like this. This fight is in direct conflict with how the game should be designed, not in a fun turn of phrase way, but in a way that momentarily strips away what makes the game work just so they could throw the player off balance. Is it fair that in a game that's built around giving you perfect information where you can see what's coming at you and react to it instead of playing a Battleship-esque guessing game, that there's a level where all the lights are off and you now have to shuffle around slowly trying not to fall off this huge elevated maze? It's either not.
I don't know if these are actually some fair comparisons. And of course, I said that and kind of lost my train of thought. I'm gonna. I shouldn't have backed up. I was gonna say I'm gonna back up just so I could like re-listen to his points so I could remember what I was gonna say. This is terrible. Exactly, global sequence. You literally reacted the same way Zeostorm did.
Playing a Battleship-esque guessing game that
oh yeah. Perfect information. Yeah. So I would disagree that Dark Souls gives the player perfect information about what's going on, and I think it's kind of notorious for not doing that. And it's just kind of always had the vibe of "you figure it out, idiot." To me, like Dark Souls is one of those perfect games for people who never bothered to read the instruction manuals, because the instruction manual is literally like the dev tips on the ground, and that's it. They really don't hold the player's hand for better or worse. For a lot of players, obviously, it can be for the worse, but if they ever get over it, they get over it, and then you kind of it's kind of ingrained into the player that the devs aren't going to hold your hand, and the games, I don't want to say they're unfair, but the scenarios are kind of stacked against the player's favor initially, and you just kind of have to overcome them through true grit or whatnot. And so like that's kind of always been my big thematic takeaway from these games, is that perseverance and not being discouraged and continuing to get back up in the face of adversity will ultimately lead to success, even if that success is inevitably a trite and tragic ending. You have no choice but to pursue it, you know? So, yeah. Hey Boris, you said, would I consider a Lies of P stream? The answer is yes. So tomorrow I'm going to begin streaming, not Lies of P, sorry if I kind of misled you there. I will begin streaming an old PS1 classic game called Alundra, which is kind of like a cross between the old 2D style of Legend of Zelda games and Bloodborne in a kind of weird, strange way. So the way that I've always described Alundra to anybody who's ever given me their ear about it is that it felt like The Legend of Zelda for adults. So it's been an extremely long time since I've played it. I've probably forgotten most of everything, so it'll almost be equivalent to like playing it blind again. So I'm sure I'll get stuck at times, and if like somebody in chat tells me answers that I ask for, that'd be like perfectly fine by me, because I've already served my time essentially. So after I go through Alundra, I am considering doing a Lies of P stream. So yeah, just stay tuned, and there will be more to come on that in the future. Yeah, I remember like how bad some of those puzzles were, but yeah, definitely on the struggle bus. A German spy did a playthrough of Alundra years ago, and it was so fun to watch. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I know. I've seen Franz's stream a couple of times over the years, like not a ton. I think we're like on different time zones for the most part, and yeah, so he's a cool dude. I'm glad he enjoyed Alundra as well. I was really happy when I saw him play through Tactics Ogre, the PSP version, before it got like ported and everything, because that was like another one of my favorite games that nobody knew about. So I figure it's kind of my turn to try to spread the awareness of such a cult classic, fantastic underground game. Okay, going back to the video.
And you now have to shuffle around slowly, trying not to fall off this huge elevated maze. It's either not fair or not fun, or both. Is it fair that one of the bosses essentially uses bad hit registration and unwieldy terrain that the physics don't play nice with as its main source of difficulty? Is it fair that certain corners and blockades give the camera an aneurysm and the game does little to limit that problem? I would argue that for all of those cases, the answer is no. And in a way, that unfairness is part of the game's ethos, and people who are claiming that these old games were tough but fair either had lizard brains or wanted to trick people into suffering with them. Because no, Dark Souls 1 is not tough but fair for shit. But I don't think it's trying to be. Miyazaki has said that these games are about overcoming adversity, not necessarily impossible.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about how you guys in the chat feel about this now, because I disagree with him, but I don't necessarily think I've gotten his full argument to know if I actually disagree or if we're just talking about similar things in different ways. Because I think for the most part they are fair, and that there are at times unfair mechanics or a little bit jankiness, which pushes the game into unfair territory. But like there's kind of a consistency to the set of the rules that the game is like presenting you with. And that might tie into what Assad is saying here, in that the games don't try to be fair. But I think because the games don't necessarily try to be fair in a more abstract sense, that doesn't mean like they aren't actually fair. I don't know how to say that otherwise.
Levels of difficulty, and what better way to overcome adversity than to not just fight the enemies in the game, but fight the game itself to a degree. It keeps putting you in situations that don't seem easily solvable with your set of tools, but you have to figure it out anyways. If you look at the evolution of the series though, it becomes clear that FromSoft's mentality going forward either shifted slightly or they learned how to execute their original vision better. You have to realize that Dark Souls, as influential as it was made at a time that From was still learning how to refine their style and gameplay loop, and you can see that in later iterations they decided decided to stray away from that sudden, disruptive, sometimes counterintuitive design and levels to challenge the player, and instead made everything more readable and sensible. That may not have been the direction that everyone thinks the series should have gone, which is why Dark Souls 1 is still some people's favorite, but it is what ended up happening. Now, me personally, I like the direction they took. Instead of having a rigid set of rules crammed through jagged hallways they weren't built for, you had games made in service of them. Boss arenas became a lot wider overall to complement how important spacing is to this combat system. You weren't equally susceptible to losing souls because of a difficult enemy as you were to the camera getting caught awkwardly during a 5-minute run back, because now the camera was smoother and the runbacks were shorter. Dark areas didn't leave you completely blind, and janky platforming sections were limited, became gradually less difficult, and were made mainly optional. Of course,
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with a lot of that, because I mean, there still have been camera issues throughout their games, but obviously they've gotten better as they've gone along. That's just part of the process of innovation over time. But yeah, I'm not sure that these are like the most fair comparisons to say that the games were originally unfair. I just think they were held back as byproducts of their time, which I don't necessarily like take that against them or anything like that. I don't know. Janky seems fair. Time is key. Yeah. All right. Elden Enthusiast, thanks for dropping by. Hopefully we'll catch you on the next one. Bella would honestly blame game websites like IGN for blowing the difficulty a bit out of proportion. Now people have these weird expectations when they first play a From game and end up stumbling throughout. Like when they talk about From games at all, it's just, oh, it's so hard. Like the game doesn't have anything else to offer but that. Yeah. So I don't know because when I was in college, I had a friend who had a PS3. I didn't have a PS3, and he let his roommate play his PS3 all the time, and apparently his roommate played Demon Souls, and he kind of had anger issues at games. Like there were times like he would throw his controller trying to rank up playing the Lone Wolves lobbies in in Halo 2 or 3. I don't remember. Maybe Halo 3. And so he also tried Demon Souls, and he threw my friend's controller at the wall and like almost broke it. And my friend was like, "What the hell, dude?" And he's like, "Oh, I'll just buy you another one." But like just kind of completely missing the point that like that wasn't his thing to break to begin with. But anyway, so the first time I heard about Demon Souls, it was in that context. Because I asked my friend like what Demon Souls was on the shelf, and he's like, "Oh, our friend played this, and he almost broke one of my controllers over it." I was like, "Oh, so the game's just hard for the sake of being hard." I don't really like games like that, so it kind of fell off my radar, even though I'd heard of it, and because of that, like I didn't realize that Demon Souls was related to Dark Souls because I heard about Dark Souls from another friend like a couple years later, obviously, and my takeaway was that Demon Souls was just an incredibly difficult game, just because. Even though, like looking back at it now, I really don't think Demon Souls is very difficult at all. But that's also definitely partially because when I played through Demon Souls, I was already familiar with like the gearing and leveling up system of the previous games, and I didn't like brick my first character, which is tradition for people's first FromSoft characters, because I went through that tradition on Dark Souls 1. So, yeah. Um, I think a lot of the jankiness or that's probably where I would say like the real unfairness comes from in like Dark Souls 1 especially, and even Bloodborne, is that you couldn't respec your characters to optimize your stats and get rid of like all the bloat. So I think for some parts of the game, that which is unfair, I think, are like more on the system side rather than the gameplay or environmental level design. If that makes sense. Hey Mortis, welcome into the stream again. Hunter Man, nice to see you. Lurking while doing Lego Builder mode. That sounds really fun. What are you doing Lego Builder mode in? Is it like Fortnite or something else? Like, sorry if I insulted you with the Fortnite thing. That's like the last Lego thing that I heard of, so that's kind of what comes to mind. Yada says, you wish you were better at articulating your thoughts, but yeah, you think it's pretty fair, save for the few moments where the game is intentionally trying to mess with you. The core is very fair. So, I'm also one of those weirdos that doesn't really mind the poisonous swamp levels, and I actually like the Tomb of the Fallen Giants for being dark and terrifying and awful because it gives like a more intimate feeling of the area when you're just like kind of blindly crawling about and getting jump scared by every bone human dog thing lurking around every corner, breathing extremely loudly. I don't know. It sucks to go through, but it's very memorable. And like when you actually go through it, you feel like you've made progress until you realize you can't fight Nito because you don't have the Lord Vessel yet. So, barring stuff like that, it's memorable, and that's kind of like one of the things that I play the games for. And like even though it's a terrible experience in a certain way, um, it's I don't ever really think it's unfair. Like the entire area is dark. There are ways to mitigate that if you ever get a skull lantern. And sure, maybe they could have given you a few more sources of illumination, but there is also the very slight ambient lighting of the player, and I definitely get why people dislike that area, especially if they're just trying to go fast and get through it. But I don't know, it does slow the game down at a pretty good time. So I just wish that the last half of DS1 was a bit more cohesive overall, which has always been like the strongest community feelings on that game in particular. Lego Fortnite just got it today. The first time you've ever played Fortnite? Okay. So is that like a different thing? Because I've always been a big fan of Lego. A big surprise, I'm sure. So yeah, let me know how that is because that sounds kind of cool. Yada agrees for the most part. Everything that you dislike about FromSoft has other aspects that save it. The stuff that sucks all has a lot of unique personality that sticks with you. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. It builds character. Mortis says, Demon Souls is so interesting as you started at Dark Souls 2. So when you're told about Demon Souls, it almost has this magical aura of mystery to your teenage brain. And now it's the FromSoft game you know the most about. Yeah, so saying I feel like Dark Souls 2 to Demon Souls is a really good transition, but yeah, it's kind of weird what games like go well with each other and what ones don't, because it's weird in that I think Dark Souls 1 kind of flows into Bloodborne decently enough to like make it work, but I don't think you can go from Bloodborne into Dark Souls 2 very easily at all. So I think you would need to go like from Bloodborne to Dark Souls 1 or Demon Souls and then into Dark Souls 2. So I feel like pretty much going from any direction from Dark Souls 2 is a positive direction, but that's also because I'm a pretty well known DS2 hater. Jasper says, it's sad to think how incredible DS1 could have been if they had a little more time. You could replace DS1 with literally any one of the FromSoft titles in there. Lego Fortnite is a different game. It's technically an expansion. It's PvE, sandbox survival. Interesting. Okay. Hey, howdy, welcome in. It's nothing at all like Fortnite and very much like Lego, like more like a Rust Minecraft type game. Interesting. Maybe I'll need to like look into it. I don't know. I might look into it. Okay.
If these were the only kinds of changes being made, the games would get really easy really fast. Every single one of these decisions being retroactively applied to Dark Souls 1 would make it an absolute cakewalk, so something else needed to be targeted to maintain the overall goal of overcoming challenge. And what the studio seemed to land on was the heavy manipulation and sometimes over-manipulation of enemy traits, which can lead to some inconsistent difficulty. Difficulty balancing is a delicate procedure. More than just more health or more damage, it's about the traits or advantages and disadvantages of you and what's trying to hurt you. A good example is poise, or the ability to not be staggered out of an action while being attacked. For any particular action game, you need to ask questions like, does the enemy have poise? Should the player character have it? Is there a limit or meter associated with it? And does it happen at all times or only with certain special moves? For example, if your game has powerful spells but wants to emphasize skill and timing with them, you should probably not give the player a ton of poise while they're cooking up those spells. Case in point, Lies of P lets you get knocked out of any of your special weapon arts during their animation, and if you get knocked out of it, you lose the ability until you can build it back up again. For a punishing game with low enemy counts during encounters and not a ton of hectic projectile-filled combat, this makes a lot of sense. In the Norse God of War saga though, you're playing as a powerful tank of a character, and a lot of emphasis has been put on your weapon abilities, which do most of your damage. You're also usually fighting large groups with a ton of range attacks coming your way at all times, so all of your powerful abilities come with a lot of poise. You're always able to pull off your big moves without getting interrupted, even when you take damage during them. If you just straight swap the poise systems in Lies of P and God of War, Lies of P would get significantly easier, God of War would get significantly harder, and both games would be worse off for it. The choice of how to implement poise is intrinsically linked to each respective game's combat tempo, cadence, goals, and challenge level. This is kind of the difference between what we call artificial difficulty, which just feels like a bunch of health and damage numbers being tweaked, and more organic difficulty. It's more granular and often requires a retooling of a lot of small elements to reach a satisfying equilibrium. It's also not uncommon for these traits to shift back and forth slightly within a single experience. I mean, at a basic level, especially in an action RPG, enemies will have more powerful attacks as the game goes on, but you'll probably have more abilities to counter that. And to me, difficulty spikes, particularly unfair difficulty spikes, can be defined as when the traits of the things that oppose you quickly and drastically increase, while yours receive minimal or no change. I know it kinda sounds like I found the world's longest way to say game hard when guy strong, and I kinda did. But the main thing I want to emphasize is that stronger doesn't necessarily mean does more damage or has more health, it's usually more subtle mechanics. Do they have additional enemies you need to deal with at the same time? Are they able to heal? Do they have significantly shorter openings? Do they limit your abilities somehow? Do they have status effects? Do their attacks command more space? Do they have tracking? Are they immune to certain damage types, etc.? Interestingly enough, Demon Souls did this a lot. It constantly changes the rules for both you and the bosses you're facing. The Storm King is fought at a distance with a special
deal with the dogs real quick. Give me a couple minutes. And then this is the kind of noob trap setup killer. If we try to come this way, the boulder comes crashing through. And then you just fight a bunch of Cabra demons, a bunch of Taurus demons, and so having another recycled... Why is that back now? Well, you got by the oldest one in the book. Venom says, when you started this playthrough, you mentioned how obvious the ball rolling trap was, and I thought he's going to fall for it on a second trip through the asylum. I figured he probably didn't have a lot of hits with this Byhander. Wait, what? That's actually really, really funny. Sorry about that. Where were we? Do we need to bust out the hour-long illusory video on poise? Maybe. So, yeah, I'm not totally on board with what he's saying yet with poise. I don't know like all of the examples with Lies of P, and I'm curious where he's coming from with, what did he say, like inorganic and organic and inorganic difficulty? I don't remember. I'll need to back up slightly.
Are they able to heal? Do they have significantly short... Enemies will have more powerful attacks as the game goes on, but you'll probably have more abilities to counter that. And to me, difficulty spikes, particularly unfair difficulty spikes, can be defined as when the traits of the things that oppose you quickly and drastically increase, while yours receive minimal or no change. I know it kinda sounds like I found the world's longest way to say game hard when guy strong, and I kinda did. But the main thing I want to emphasize is that stronger doesn't necessarily mean does more damage or has more health, it's usually more subtle mechanics. Do they have additional enemies you need to deal with at the same time? Are they able to heal? Do they have significantly shorter openings? Do they limit your abilities somehow? Do they have status effects? Do their attacks command more space? Do they have tracking? Are they immune to certain damage types, etc.? Interestingly enough, Demon Souls did this a lot. It constantly changes the rules for both you and the bosses you're facing. The Storm King is fought at a distance with a special weapon. The old hero is blind, but he can hear you, so you have to be careful how much noise you're making, and the Adjudicator has a single weak point that you need to target. Everywhere else does less damage. Dark Souls 1...
Yeah, so he touched on poise a little bit. I wonder if he's going to go back to it, because I'm not entirely sure where he's coming from or like why he thinks it might be a problem just yet. So he's just kind of like touched the surface. So hopefully he goes into more detail.
One opted for a much different approach. Like I said, it's got a more standardized set of rules that applies to nearly everything you fight and is incredibly consistent mechanically. It's how it's packaged that causes you issues. But in the newer games, we see more of Demon Souls' identity seep into the boss design. Yorm is another attempt at the Storm King idea, Rykard sort of melds it with the normal combat system, Radagon gives you the option to fight with an army, Owl has a smoke bomb that takes away your ability to heal for a short period of time, Mog steals your health halfway through the fight, a few bosses and mini-bosses in Sekiro all but require you to use certain consumables to not die instantly or do anything more than chip damage. With every release, a higher percentage of these encounters are introducing new mechanics that might only apply to one boss fight. More than just a different moveset, they fundamentally change how the boss works. Now usually this creates something really special. A lot of the bosses that I just mentioned are some of my favorites that FromSoft has ever done, but sometimes there are changes that are made too drastically, too suddenly, without giving you, the player, any proper recourse. Armored Core 6 already has a notorious difficulty spike.
So yeah, I would definitely agree that having certain enemies like Headless not being able to take damage without those types of consumables is pretty garbage, and that's something that I've been pretty vocal about in the past. But I'm not sure that's like quite the biggest problem just yet, so I'm curious to see where else the video is going to go. Mortis definitely thinks your opinion of the Demon Souls style fights has improved. You don't dislike them anymore, and now you do like them. So I think the issue with Demon Souls is that most of it is just like pretty bare bones, like hardly functional. And so they tend to be a little too gimmicky for the sake of being gimmicky. And one way that I would compare Demon Souls to a similar style of fight would be the certain kinds of bosses that you'd find in Legend of Zelda. While all of those are also kind of gimmicky bosses, I think they're typically done a bit more organically and feel like they have maybe not like more interplay, but I don't know, that they just kind of like match where you go through. But of course, Zelda is a hell of a lot more formulaic with being introduced to the new dungeon, getting a new power-up, needing said power-up to kind of interact with the boss mechanics to defeat said boss. It's quite a leap in a different direction than you'd get from Dark Souls or Demon Souls and whatnot. Yada misses the weirder boss fights. You wish Elden Ring had more. You want to do boss room platforming and you're not kidding. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in that it can be beloved, but it could also not be implemented very well. So I think Rykard is probably their best version of a gimmick boss fight yet. But with that being said, I think Rykard's fight still does have problems with just how inescapable some of his attacks are in Phase 2. Where to me, Rykard feels like the most of a vigor check boss of all of the bosses. Unless you're just able to outscale and out DPS him, which you're not likely to do if you face him in a fairly natural way, like when you first go to like Altus Plateau or somewhere around that time frame.
Like at the end of its first chapter with Balteus, who has a recharging pulse shield, homing missiles, attacks that suffocate the space around you, a giant flaming sword, and a lot more speed than anything you fought before. All of this stuff comes out of nowhere and you're asked to figure it all out at once. Not long after the game released, a few bosses were hit with nerfs because the community found them to be way too difficult for what was around them, with Balteus' tracking on his homing missiles taking a big hit and his health being lowered as well. But even though I agree that the difficulty was disproportionately high for this section of the game, I don't think it comes down to his damage output or his dead-eye tracking. I think it came more from the fact that the game didn't train you properly, and also the options that you have during this fight are very hard to access in the early game.
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair criticism, and I feel similarly to a lot of the other FromSoft games where I don't think they're tutorialized very well beyond the whole, like, hey, hold LB to block type stuff, and they would be better served by having better tutorials. Sekiro, at the very least, did have the guy you could fight, Hanbei the Undying. I thought that was a really good thing that they did, but there's only so much of that which they did, and I feel like they could have gone further. And I was talking about this on stream the other day, I think it was, where if you don't have certain skills, some of the boss fights can feel like they're oppressive. So if you don't have the Mikiri counter to fight the first Naginata user in like the Hirata estate, especially, he's not like a real boss. He's just a mini boss, but he's a spear user, and most of his attacks are thrusts. But if you don't have the thing which mitigates thrusts, what do you have? Firecrackers, maybe, if you bought them, you know? So Sekiro does have other problems, which might be a design problem. I don't know. So let's go on into the rest of the video there. You admit the music crescendo while getting bombarded with a million skulls is a pretty cool spectacle. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It just sucks that you spam dodge the skulls to just still get roll caught by the gigantic freaking sword that's as tall as a skyscraper that smashes into the ground. There's no way to dodge it. Get wrecked.
These are obviously things that can really be fixed with a patch, but they should have been fixed before the game was released in the first place. And it's a mistake that I feel the studio wasn't really making even just a few years ago. In fact, the exact quote-unquote FromSoft B team that worked on AC6 did this perfectly back in 2019 with Sekiro. Before one of the more difficult fights in the game, at least in your first playthrough, Genichiro, they placed a glass cannon mini-boss who conditions you to learn the game's parry mechanic well and see how it can be used to your advantage. This mini-boss is a pain in the ass if you fight him like a Souls boss, but if you can nail the parry timings like this game wants you to, you can drain his health in less than 20 seconds. And now that that idea has been instilled in you, when you see Genichiro's...
Yeah, but even that is arguably one of their poorer design choices, in that if you fight him like a Souls boss and don't or cannot do the parry thing, you're pretty much screwed. I do think that what's his name? Let's go back.
Drain his health.
I think Ashina Elite Jinsuke Saze is probably the biggest wall boss in Sekiro that nobody talks about, because if somebody cannot parry, they're very unlikely to get through this dude. And I've seen people crash on this guy and take longer to fight him than it took for them to fight Genichiro, which I don't really know how to feel about, to be honest. I mean, obviously, I don't think it's a good thing, and I've said for a long time that I think Sekiro would have been better if you didn't have to parry, but you could also do like more direct vitality damage at a comparable level. Mercy thinks they're perfect the way they are, but maybe that's just you. Feels like the old days, if you know what I mean, especially Sekiro. So I don't think they're perfect the way they are, but that's because I'm also a bit cynical and nitpicky, and I always am dreaming of like what could be better rather than being content with what I have, which is, I don't know, probably a bad thing. But yeah, with this at least, I think there could be improvements to like make more people happy. But with that being said, I still do appreciate like the level in which you need to master Sekiro to beat it, because it is completely different from the other FromSoft games. And I do think it is perfectly fine to have a game that's different and forces the player to engage with it that way. But I don't know. It's just like there's good and bad with both approaches, I suppose.
In less than 20 seconds. And now that that idea has been instilled in you, when you see Genichiro's flurry attack right after, which before this fight might have seemed like something you'd be better off running away from, you can actually see it as an opportunity to do significant posture damage. Now you could argue that Sekiro is a lot easier to balance because it's just got one weapon and one build, fair enough, but something like this where you're just training the player to use the mechanics properly is something that you could apply to any game. In Armored Core, you don't have iframes like the Souls games, dodging does not make you briefly invincible, and if you try to dash through bullets, you will 100% take damage. And one of the things I learned eventually in this game was that because of this, taking advantage of your spacing and airtime was actually way more beneficial than dodging. Dodging could help with last minute maneuvering, but you were able to avoid a lot of these situations to begin with if you were just constantly moving around, beside, and especially over enemies. And while that seems obvious to me now, at first my conditioning had me staying somewhat low despite having a lightweight build and trying to rely on avoiding damage at the last minute by dodging. That's how I tried to fight Balteus, and that's why it took me over over 3 hours to finally beat him by the skin of my teeth. Once I had my eureka moment though, just by playing around with the first couple of missions after the fight and realizing how to make effective use of the movement, I went back and absolutely smoked the dude without breaking a sweat. It was like I was playing an entirely different game even though it had only been like 30 minutes. Given this game has roughly 687 mini-bosses, I wish that one of them had a moveset that involved a big, low, sweeping attack like a huge melee swing or a giant wall of rockets shooting forward, and another one maybe featured a simple pulse shield just so you could come across it at least once. If those
Yeah, I can appreciate what he's saying here, but I'm trying to, because I haven't really played Armored Core. Maybe this isn't the best example, but is like fighting that first boss essentially like fighting Genichiro outright, because he like kind of forces a high degree, maybe not like a high degree, but a moderate degree of mastery over the basics that might feel a bit of a big hurdle to expect of like brand new players? Or is it because he is that first hurdle boss that he makes the rest of the game more manageable? So I wonder if this boss right here is comparable to what was his name, Jinsuke Saze, the dude right before Genichiro, where once you beat this dude, it kind of allows you to face like the stuff beyond him. So maybe he just thinks there's a little bit too much going on with this boss specifically. Because, not that I disagree, but I'm just thinking of it from like a devil's advocate perspective, that why is Jinsuke Saze or whatnot different than this guy?
hypothetical enemies were placed anywhere before Balteus, you could keep him just as difficult in theory, but in practice he becomes way more manageable. Of course, the other reason why the fight was so much easier the second time around was because I had a bit more money and could play around with my build a little more, which would have been a really nice option to have when I was originally fighting him. I didn't need access to overpowered weapons or anything, I just wanted to try out different combos without needing to grind out level replays for more money, or head to the garage and trade weapons and parts in for each other one at a time, which are things that you never really have to do past this point. In both knowledge and equipment, AC6 failed to provide advantages to the player that even remotely matched the advantages suddenly given to the boss, and it makes it feel really out of place. You can't even treat it like a skill check because what comes after it is infinitely easier. It's like having a pre-bouncer that checks if you're 26 before you get to the real bouncer who checks if you're 21. The final boss
hold on. I'll let him finish.
of Chapter 4 also caught heat and a nerf for being too difficult, but I actually don't believe this one deserved.
Oh, maybe it's not comparable. So yeah, I think like most of the mini bosses after Genichiro are a hell of a lot easier than him, with the exception of like the Snake Eye trio. But yeah, okay. Hey Scaleezy, nice to see you again.
Any changes whatsoever. For the reasons I just went over, I think Balteus is an unfair difficulty spike, but I think Ibis is just a tough but fair boss. Why is that when she can do this?
No repair kits remaining.
Good question. Ibis is undoubtedly a significant challenge, but at the point that you're at in the game, you have enough tools to get over this hump if you play your cards right. Your understanding of movement and how to avoid attacks is likely improved a lot at this point, and more importantly, your arsenal is absolutely massive and you have instant, easy access to multiple builds given how much money you've earned this late into the game. Fighting this boss is really just about finding the right build, because yeah, she sucks if you fight her with weapons that do constant damage with easy aiming and low stagger like the machine gun. She's way too fast and her attacks are way too strong. But if you move to a high precision, high stagger build and only shoot her after she's completed a dodge or a heavy attack, the weapons you have access to at this point can fully stagger her in a whopping 2 hits and absolutely dismantle her health bar while she's incapacitated. Playing around with different builds to try and find the right one took me like 45 minutes, and then beating her took me about 10 more, and I don't just think she's less bullshit because she took me personally less time than Balteus did. I think she's less bullshit because there's a direct path and strategy to counter her extreme traits, which is something you didn't have in that other fight. Do you know how much more fair a fight like Melania would be if you just had the ability to parry at certain parts of the waterfowl attack? Everybody talks about how her damage needs to be reduced or the waterfowl needs to be removed or something. You could honestly keep her as is. But if you're gonna say, hey, this enemy has a life leech move, which also applies to the mechanic that was added to this game specifically to help struggling players, making it more trouble than it's worth, and you're gonna give her the most unstoppable, difficult to escape move in the game, could you at least give me the ability to turn that clap back against her. If you're gonna have a random sporadically moving laser attack which destroys even full health bars that have hit the soft HP cap, can you at least give me a tiny visual representation of where it's gonna go a split second early so I'm not just playing a guessing game? If you're gonna have the second phase of the final boss instantly move around a giant arena and feature multiple long homing attacks, can you not give them the ability to send out 3 attacks at the same goddamn time? The easiest way to see just how wonky and over manipulated some of these bosses can be in the recent games is by checking out the health mechanics, because at this point you might as well put a black bar over the health bar. It doesn't give you any useful information. Melania recovers health by attacking you. Mog's health bar is larger than it seems because he recovers it halfway through. No matter what, you can only limit it a little bit with an item. The Fire Giant's second phase starts when he's around 1/3 health, but you do so much less damage even when hitting his weak spot in this phase that you need to hit it more in phase 2 than you do in phase 1, which makes no sense. Malekith's red attack.
Yeah, I just kind of big disagree about the health bar because it definitely provides a lot of tension for the player. You know how much better a run is going by being able to compare the boss's current health to the amount of flasks or health you have remaining. So completely removing it, I don't think actually makes the game better. Although I think that kind of argument could be made for Sekiro. And if you do want to remove the health bar, then I think they would need to redesign a lot of the bosses to have visuals to better accurately reflect their current state of health or poise or like posture or something along those lines. But that's just kind of a little bit beyond this topic at hand right now, I think. So, thought somebody else just came in. Oh, Brian. Okay, I was just blind for a second. Brian G77, welcome to the stream. Your problem with AC6 is that most boss moves are almost undodgeable, and that made you not like the game that much because you feel it didn't matter what you tried to do differently, you'd still get hit. So I haven't played AC6, so I can't talk about that. And do you think that's partially because of the style of armor mods that you were using? Do you think you'd be able to dodge more boss attacks with different equipment? Or is there like more to that? I just don't have the best frame of reference to tell. And El Degusto, welcome back in. Do you think Godfrey can take an armored core if he ambushed one? That depends if the Elden Ring is stronger than Corral. Bella says, definitely he would be on top of the clawing at the outside, pull out the person piling in it, and eat them like the portrait of Saturn eating his son. I know what you're talking about there. Mortis says, you can kill Moog in phase 1, but it requires a bit. That's how you did it your first run. Yeah, I don't necessarily know if that's fair. You can do it without stacking Terra Magica as well. I've meant to test, but I definitely forgot to like ever go back and try. And it definitely fell off my radar. Whether or not you could use something like an Albinoric blood clot, a blood pot or whatever it's called, to stop Moog's healing. I feel like that wouldn't work, but yeah. Anyway, I don't think this is like the best example, but I would agree that I do think Millennia is a bit over-designed comparatively to the rest of the game. And I feel like just the Halig Tree area in general feels like the equivalent of a DLC area in a previous FromSoft game in terms of its random difficulty spike compared to everything else.
Shorten your health bar. Everyone and their mother has a heal in Armored Core 6, which is so frustrating because you feel like you're making no progress when this bar starts swinging harder than an NBA wife on wine night. And that's not even mentioning the ever-growing obsession with hidden phase 2 health bars. Even in a game that I find exceptionally well balanced and fair like Sekiro, they'll explicitly tell you how many health bars the enemy has, only to psych you out and give them another one half the time for shock value. This should have been done once for the Guardian Ape because it's such an incredible, well-presented moment, and then the rest should have just told you the actual number that the bosses had. At the end of the day, I don't even know if I dislike this stuff. Like, even Balteus and Melania and all these bosses that people disproportionately complain about, I like them. I like fighting them a lot. But I also recognize that there's a way to deliver this experience and keep the difficulty high in the ways that matter, while also not overwhelming the player and frustrating your audience. Because right now we're seeing this cycle of releasing games with more and more unreasonable random difficulty spikes, people complain about it, and then eventually that results in quickly throwing together patches that nerf damage, making the fight easier, but in an artificial way. I appreciate that after all this time, FromSoft is still finding new ideas to play around with to avoid the formula becoming stale, and like I said, I think their turn away from creating frustrating scenarios that clash with a stiff set of rules into manageable scenarios with more give or take in its rules is a good one. But in some cases, the balancing is starting to get a lot sloppier. The amount of even hardcore Souls fans who had problems with how late game Elden Ring bosses worked was surprising, and everyone acknowledges that Armored Core 6 feels like it was playtested by a single baboon. And even though the easiest and most common solution seems to be lower the enemy damage or health, which, yeah, they could definitely do with a little bit of that too, I do think some of it comes from a deeper design issue that's hopefully addressed by the team going forward. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, leave it a like, subscribe, join the Discord, it's in the description, and I'll see y'all next time.
So this is a weird and interesting video because there's a lot that I disagree with it, and I don't really think they've presented like much of a solution to it other than just being like, oh, this is kind of an issue. But I don't necessarily feel as though I agree that they're highlighting things in a way that I would agree with them. So I feel like I'm kind of at an impasse with it. So I think it's definitely an interesting topic. It's brought up interesting points, but I just disagree for like a lot of them. And so I don't know if so much of this stuff is like design philosophy. And I wish he talked a bit more about like the poise and posture thing, because that was really interesting to me. And I thought he was going to do more with it, because I'm of the opinion that Dark Souls 1's poise system was the best by a country mile in the games. I don't know how I feel about Elden Rings, to be honest. Like, it's not bad. I guess it's like just kind of disappointing that like, the postures and poise stuff in Elden Ring is so prohibitively expensive for like a lot of builds, or you're pretty much just wearing a bull goat or a veteran set armor, you know? Aside from that, like it's okay. It's not bad. It's not like Dark Souls 3 where it's like needs an overhaul to actually like feel like it exists. And then DS2 has its own set of issues that's hard to talk about. And then Poison Posture is a really good part of Bloodborne, but there isn't really poise so much as Bloodborne just took the whole stagger mechanic and refined it very well. And it has its own stuff going on because you're able to parry at range with the firearms and whatnot. So yeah, I wish there was a little bit more detail for me to fully get where he's coming from. Hey, Albigade, welcome back. You feel like the nerf argument doesn't necessarily follow with most examples? Yeah, I felt like there were a lot of non sequiturs as well. Like Belteus was nerfed on one attack's tracking, which is very visible but not that dangerous. Radagon's hitboxes were fixed. If anything, just the initial pre-nerf difficulty is exaggerated and then used to criticize balance. And yeah, I don't think like a lot of this stuff, some of the nerfs like weren't really that substantial. Like Radagon didn't feel that different to me when I've gone back and played it. Although I've gotten so much more knowledgeable about Elden Ring, like most times when I face Radagon, I can just trash him before anything problematic really happens to me. So maybe that's not too fair, and I don't know if there's a substantial difference between like 1.0 Radagon and, 1.05 Radagon, but that's not really that big of a deal. The first Radagon nerf made him a joke. Well, the thing is, I've played through 1.0 multiple times and haven't had an issue, but that's because I've, abused the hell out of the game. So I don't accurately remember what the differences were between pre-nerf Radagon and post-nerf. And when I did fight Radagon my first time through the game, I learned it on pre-nerf Radagon, which I really enjoyed the fight. It was a real pain in the ass trying to figure out how to maneuver up to him, which is like pretty much half the battle, unironically. And then trying to read his stupid fake homing crystal soul mass on his back and whatnot in the second phase. Like those are like the difficult parts of the fight. But I didn't think Radagon was super broken. Actually, that's kind of not true. I'm kind of remembering now that I felt like he was a lot more aggressive with his melee attacks pre-nerf Radagon. And it felt a little bit overwhelming, perhaps. But maybe I've just gotten a lot better at reading him, so I just haven't felt that way for a very long time. Methoda said, "You like the lore implications of the takedown pips in Sekiro? It showed when an enemy was pushing past what was considered its limit or something." Yeah, so I think that it didn't happen too often. I think it was mostly just Genichiro, which has like kind of some lore significance, and the Guardian Ape, which was, the real shock value aspect of Sekiro, and that boss got back up. But some of the other ones, I don't remember if there's like really a surprise second, third, or fourth phase beyond Ishin. Scowlazy says, only having hyper armor devolves into who can get the first hit and stunlock the other first. At times, yes. Or sometimes having hyper armor means who gets the last hit, because the first one gets mitigated. Pre-nerf had bigger hitboxes and damage. Nerf decreased hitbox size and damage, but the lowered damage was a bug, so it got reverted to the original damage. They might have also lowered his health. Yeah. Global Sequence says, to answer my question about what Balteos' purpose is, it's less about being a difficulty spike and more about how the lesson of AC6 is choosing the right tools for the job. Okay. So yeah. I don't have the best handle on that, so I don't know how fair the Balteos example is to bring up in general. So broadly speaking, I think I might tend to agree with what Assad was saying here, in that I feel like the bosses aren't as polished as they used to be, but I don't know if that's like a From Software design problem or something else, because the video felt a bit all over the place at times, with the comments about tough but fair and like complaints about the cameras and the level design. I never really felt the level design was explicitly unfair. I'm trying to think of like the worst level feel for me. I think like maybe the worst part of DS1, which was probably slightly a bit of a design problem, is the two archers outside in Anor Londo, because of the way like you would slide back if you're blocking a hit and you're on that narrow ledge. Like that's probably the most unfair part of Dark Souls 1. But yeah, I don't know. So anyway, this is an interesting video. I'm not gonna like it just because I don't feel like I actually like the points that he made, even though I think it brought up some interesting points. But nonetheless, I'm definitely gonna share it with you guys in the chat if you want to counterbalance my lack of a like. What did I do? Okay, my lack of a like and all that. So that was the video we just watched from Assad Anjem. From Software's design has a big problem. Let me look at some of his other stuff. I might subscribe though. Did they actually fix Redfall? Why is Sekiro so addictive? Ooh, he sounds like a real big Sekiro fanboy. Bloodborne is better than your favorite game. The best game I can't explain. Alright, so this looks like it could be some fun stuff for your stream, so I'll go ahead and subscribe. Even though I didn't like. Okay, so next we'll go into the worst mistake in FromSoft history, Bloodborne by Evan Explains.
Some footage in this video is for...
Hey Eric Williams, nice to see you again. How you doing? Scowleasy says, modern Souls games have an issue with sprinting at an enemy and staggering them before they can react. It works on nearly every regular level enemy. That's pretty true. I think that can be a fair criticism, that it doesn't feel like they have a lot of enemy diversity, especially after playing the previous games. When you look at something like the Erdtree Avatar and you're like, oh, that's the Asylum Demon reskinned. Or if you look at the Banished Knights, oh, that's a Capra Demon reskinned. So yeah, I do think that the games could definitely improve by having a few more enemy types. So the Zamora are terrifying. Going to the Zamora ruins, I will just nope out of that every time now, because there's real no benefit for me like sticking around that area. But if you had a couple more Zamorians or Crucible Knights strewn throughout the game, that could vary up the difficulty and make certain areas more challenging. So I think parts of Lane are good because you do have like the random well, there are like 2 Crucible Knights there, or maybe it's just the one. I don't know. There's definitely at least 2. Is there 3? I can think of the 2, like the one in the gold room and the one by the scarab. Anyway, but you don't really get a lot of the mixture. So you've got some of the bigger exile soldier dudes, and those are pretty good because they don't get staggered very easily. And sometimes you'll have the banished knights in like Stormvale. And I actually liked 1.0 Langdell a lot more than the current build. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. You think part of it is they rush sometimes? Look at Lost Isleth in that boss fight, yeah. Parts of every game either the devs don't like or don't have enough time for, and it suffers for that. True. Scalise says most small enemies are quote unquote cheesed by simply attacking first, which conditions the player to not learn their moves and just run up and start swinging. Well, to be fair, Elden Ring doesn't really have the most complex combat system. I actually think it's worse than Bloodborne in a lot of ways, but because Elden Ring facilitates a lot more player freedom, it has the edge in its just kind of approach to combat, if that makes sense. Like, it's not so much the mechanics, it's the approach, which elevates it. So, yeah. Good observations, though.
Some footage in this video is from Internet Archives. The links will be found down below.
He misspelled there. Let's shame him.
You're being transported to another plane. Billions of blinks from Earth. This euphoric feeling. This place. This sensation. Evan explained. And this, Evan, will be your guide into the next door in your adventure. Open the door and hear the story of FromSoftware's worst mistake. A company that doesn't make a lot of those. But, in this case, and with one game that released in 2015, they did. Was the mistake unforgettable? Was the mistake irredeemable? Or was the mistake so good that the rest of the game suffered as a result? Open the door and take your next steps.
So I think that's supposed to be a Twilight Zone parody type thing. Alright, so I'm curious to hear what the worst mistake is. Oh, Nightbot calling me out? Oh no.
There are no games quite like it.
The scary door. Yeah, I still feel like I need to go and check out Order 1886. If not play it, at least see what it was about. Because that's kind of like what I always associate Bloodborne with.
Released almost a decade ago,
Oh no,
Bloodborne
don't
has
say
been
that.
and will remain a gem
Oh,
to
no.
players worldwide. Every single bit of this game is fantastic, and every time I've ever logged in, I get giddy thinking about, well, just everything. After hyping up Bloodborne like that, and with this title, you might wonder what mistake FromSoft has made, and did you just get clickbaited into this topic?
I mean, I got clickbaited a little bit. So, a little bit of a production note. It sounds like my guy is either like too close to his mic or he's got his gain set up too high because it's a little bit crunchy. But anyway.
I did clickbait you, because there's 2 mistakes here.
Astanex says it's not making it on the PC. That's the biggest mistake. Got him.
They both land us in the haunting town of Yharnam. Can you imagine if I told you that Elden Ring has over 300 weapons? Now, what if I told you to knock that number down to just 26? You might think that's crazy, but this was all in the vision of Miyazaki's world. The mistake FromSoft would make is not realizing that the quality of these weapons trumped any quantity of other games. Bloodborne Did This Right is one of my highest viewed shorts of all time for a reason. The community desperately wants these weapons to return. So let's go through them to really hammer home what I mean.
Did somebody
Oh my god, volume. Okay. Hey G6BR, welcome into the stream. Been enjoying the reactions, but can never get here in time? Well, thank you for making it this time and for watching the VODs. I appreciate that. In terms of hardware, if your DPS is too high, the constant limb breaks and blood splashes will actually lag the game during a boss fight. Yeah. So, obviously, I am a huge fan of Bloodborne because it's kind of what my channel started off of. If you look down at my silly little stream banner, I used like the Bloodborne style art, and I really adore the trick weapons for both their simplicity and complexity, in that you can treat each form of the weapon as an individual thing, but the true beauty of it lies in between when you can transition between modes on the fly. So I bring this up quite often when the topic does come up, but when I was playing Elden Ring and got teleported to the Volcano Manor and fought Inquisitor Giza and then got the Giza wheel, I was like, oh my god, this is the pizza cutter. We have trick weapons in Elden Ring? Because like when I first played, I fairly quickly went up north through Egg Heel Lake, but I had missed Egg Heel. Actually, I think I might have like come from the north. I don't remember. Anyway, I went through towards the cave that Patches was in, and it naturally got invaded by Nereus. Fought him and saw that he dropped the Reduvia, and then I saw its weapon blade art, and I was like, oh man, this is really cool. This is very different. This is kind of like the Moonlight Greatsword blade effect that's not on a Moonlight Greatsword at all. So that just really opened up my mind to the potential of the different types of weapons that could exist in Elden Ring, and then was very summarily disappointed later on when they ended up being a lot more vanilla than I would have liked. Obviously, having the Ashes of War and whatnot was a fantastic addition to the game that I really appreciate, but suffice it to say, there were no Giza wheels, there were no... I mean, there's a Giza wheel, there's no pizza cutter, there's no actual transformation attacks, which is immensely disappointing. So I think it would still be really cool that if in the DLC or something like that, they added in trick weapons, and the way that they functioned was instead of having an Ash of War, they could just transform on the fly. That would make a ton of sense to me and be really cool. But I feel like that still wouldn't really scratch that itch that I really have from like Bloodborne's combat in incorporating a lot more limb breaks and things of that nature. And I think that's like one of the biggest fumbles of Elden Ring, is just that the strength builds really suck vanilla, but I feel like that could have been mitigated very heavily by having more of the strength style combat tied into breaking enemy posture or breaking limbs. And you could have had like the dex stuff done really well, things like frost and bleed, and they could have like been broken all in their own different ways. So anyway, that's just kind of like my pipe dream of Elden Ring, and I'm getting a bit off topic there. And as AskNext says, the DLC will fix everything. I really should add in like the DLC will fix X counter. The DLC which takes us to Londor where we meet Velka. Yep. That
The
one.
Boomhammer is exactly the thematic feel you'd want to complement this Victorian steampunk atmosphere. This one was acquired by pretty easy yet memorable means. While the Boomhammer is an amazing addition, the main functionality and the means to equip a small and a large version is exactly why saying that 15 main right-hand melee weapons is closer to 30. And if you want to get more particular, we'll include the DLC where the Boomhammer was found, making the total go to 26, or 52 total weapons if we're counting the combinations as different ones. Okay, let's get even more specific and include that each of the weapons has 2 extra versions in the Chalice dungeons at some different custom seed, and with that,
I don't feel like that's fair because the weapon is the same. It's just the gems that are different, and the gems do, but they don't really matter.
there is 156 total right-hand weapons in Bloodborne. Sometimes it's quality and quantity over just quantity. While the chalice dungeons and seating might be something Miyazaki was quoted saying he wanted to improve on, and would follow through with that in Elden Ring, Miyazaki has also called Bloodborne the game that had left the biggest mark on his heart. And you can feel that in the weapon design philosophy.
It would be nice to have like a timeline for these quotes, because if this was made in obviously 2022 or something like that, you'd be like, oh, okay, this was after they were either done working on Elden Ring or at the end of it. Because just without that context, like, I don't know if he's saying this after the release of DS3 or Sekiro or whatnot.
Left the biggest mark on his heart. And you can feel that in the weapon design philosophy. Each weapon felt unique when you found them scattered throughout Yharnam, as you never really found them scattered, unlike the disposable heals and silver bullets. This game was all about the weapon technique and mastery. A prime example of this was the Blades of Mercy. See this large right-hand dagger? Well, you could parry by shooting a boss or an enemy mid-swing, then stab into them and ruin their lives. Or you could go full Eileen the Crow mode and break the blades into smaller daggers with a button press to quickly move for strikes. Bloodborne was all about rewarding the mastery of its combat, as striking with them, then hitting the transform button would do a transformation attack. Bloodborne's DLC would expand upon this concept and push it to an unforgettable level in the Old Hunters DLC. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower uses her Rikuyo against you, but
And as Scalisi says, and just how many of these weapons are really gated behind a lot of the content. And I think the Rikuyo is like one of the prime examples of that. I know so many people who would love to start off the game being able to use the Rikuyo or the Burial Scythe, but they can't. So they essentially have to go out of their way to complete the game so they can start the game to complete the game with the weapon that they want, which sounds just as convoluted as I made that sentence sound. Like, unironically, I've seen people on stream be like, oh, this is a Rikuyo run of the game. So they load up a brand new game and then they beeline it to Amelia so they could beeline it to the Hunter's Nightmare to try to go through freaking Ludwig, the stupid forgotten, not forgotten, but the failures, the living failures, and then Maria, just so they could go down the well, fight the two damn sharks to get the freaking Rikuyo so they can finally begin to play the game. It's like all the memes of WoW. It's like, oh, I beat the game, now what do I do? Now you can play the game. it's so complex. So that's kind of why I've always said that I wanted like a new game minus option, or after you beat the game your first time, it opens up like a challenge mode menu where you can like choose your starting weapon, your starting armor, your starting gift essentially, and you can just play the game however the hell you want. Because that'd be amazing. That's pretty much like all I ever wanted. I mean, that's a lie. I want a lot more, but that is like my number 2 desire for these games, with number 1 being an actual bona fide multi-slotted save system. What's the point of a cool scythe if it's gotten from the final boss? You'll never get a true picture of its strength, if at all, if it's all on New Game Plus. Exactly. Oh, yeah, and Mortis, you bring up a good point, that you can also use the Chalice dungeons to get certain weapons early, like like a Burial Blade variant, which is true, but that is kind of also predicated on being online to connect to a root chalice to get to one of those shops. Brian says, challenges and randomizer mode should be normalized in FromSoft games. I agree. I know Lords of the Fallen said they wanted to include a randomizer in like the beginning of this year. That sounds pretty cool. I mean, I'm not super into randomizers to begin with, but if that starts pushing the needle in that direction, I am all for it. You can't get the DLC variants early. Yeah, and part of that is because the DLC weapons are just kind of like coded differently, I think, but true. The Miyazaki quote about Bloodborne is June 19. Thank you. Yeah, so that's a lot earlier than I was actually expecting from the context of this video. So I definitely appreciate that global sequence. Thank you.
You can also gain them for yourself if you fight for your life in this well. Alright, fish boy. Yeah, he's stronger than any of the bosses in the game. Holy shit, they're fighting each other! Let's go! It's a Royal Rumble! I hit him with the Shaman Bone Blade. Elden Ring would
These
only
sound
learn
effects, though,
half of
kinda
the lesson from
destroying my
Bloodborne.
ears.
Well, I think Elden Ring understood that some weapons were worth a large journey to acquire. I don't think that Elden Ring's hundreds of weapons are as memorable as about 30 of them. While Bloodborne, I find myself remembering every single one.
Let me think about that. Yeah, I can kind of see what he means, but I don't know if that's a fair comparison. If for no other reason than in Elden Ring, you can use whatever Ash of War on most weapons, so you really only have like the special weapons which are more unique, and it's a lot easier to remember unique weapons. And because there are so many more weapons, you're more likely to be less familiar with them just because of the sheer amount. So I don't like, I definitely understand where he's coming from, but I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. So I say that even though I would agree that I feel like I have more attachment to a lot more of the weapons in Bloodborne than in Elden Ring specifically. But that's, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Think about that more.
And thinking about them whenever I play another Souls game. Clearly Miyazaki thought about them too, as weapons like the Shikage from Bloodborne appear in Elden Ring. Does this look familiar? A blood katana, Maybe even rivers of blood familiar.
Yeah, that just kind of feels disingenuous because this is just hiltless, or the Chaos Blade. So it's not from Bloodborne, bro. It's from a game earlier than that. Chicago.
Miyazaki was very particular about both games' philosophy on weapon design. I believe Elden Ring was more focused on celebrating previous weapons in the series and combining them into a new giant world, while Bloodborne was one cohesive steampunk Victorian land. Sure, it is preference, and if quantity is really your thing, then fair enough. But I call it a mistake to abandon less is more, and the Shikage really represents this. Sure, the main transform animation is a pretty basic blood katana attack to Elden Ring standards, but they experimented with a whole stat that you could build into called Blood Tinge, which has a trade-off. You take damage over time the more you are in this transform state, but you also deal more damage and rally it back. Rallying damage was another system I feel is a mistake to abandon. And clearly Lords of the Fallen agreed, as they even have their own version of the rally system.
I mean, it is kind of still there with Millennia's Great Rune. The issue is the balancing on it is trash, and it doesn't feel impactful enough to be worth using. So you're half right, but half wrong right there.
Taking damage, recovering that health back when dealing damage. I don't think future games need to abandon a shield the way Bloodborne did, but I think this game understood its goals exactly, and I think it is a mistake to not expand on a system that worked. Clearly FromSoft agreed in their DLC for Bloodborne because the weapons kept getting crazier, and I have unfortunately gotta say that Elden Ring did this next one dirty. The Whirligig Saw may look familiar to Elden Ring players, and I have even made a short on how Elden Ring missed a golden opportunity. The saw in Bloodborne is pretty heavy on one transformation, but this is the best ease of use weapon the game has, simply because you can keep revving the blade into whatever target, and it has heavy stagger potential for easy crits. It's not the most exciting, but it is the most lethal. And in Elden Ring, the only thing I ever see people use this for is a glitch that is in a speedrun, so I guess it was done right. You definitely understand at this point, transformation weapons were a pretty sweet idea, but I think the lesser known portion was that each of them worked with a build, and some would scale more damage to different types of enemies and PvP. The Beast Claws, for example, were a build that I still haven't mastered. These werewolf claws scaled with the Beast Embrace rune, and with the rune it added new attacks to it. The beast meter would tick and tick up, and more kills were needed to keep it fed. While some weapon transformations would do a big burst of damage to you, like the Bloodletter. Okay, what do you think this weapon transforms into? Really quickly, if you don't know and you want to guess, pause the video, put it in the comments.
Hey Tyler, welcome back to chat. Giza's Wheel was your main weapon in your first Elden Ring playthrough? How dare you? Beast Claws scale off Tinnitus? No, that's Tinnitrus, which scales off Tinnitus.
I am in a room full of these doors and no step borrowed to help me get out.
The Bloodletter would stack a debuff called Frenzy onto you, and Frenzy was Bloodborne's version of going more insane. Not too far from Frenzy in Elden Ring, but this was stacked with the other major mistake FromSoft would make, and that is abandoning Insight.
The next door you're about to open is into the Tale of Insight, a system that grants us eyes, and many, many more. Insight is a system that was founded in Bloodborne in 2015, and has never since returned to any FromSoftware game, making it yet another large mistake. Open the door and hear the tale of Insight.
So yeah, I'm not sure if Insight is the better comparison point as much as it is like World Tendency, because you could say that Insight is just
Insight was this
World
extra
Tendency,
hidden
essentially.
element of the game that every Bloodborne fan loved, and for good reason. Insight was the knowledge of the Great Ones becoming more empowered on the player, via discovering new areas, defeating bosses, and just finding Insight as a collectible to use. This stat was used to see the world for what it truly was, and it was horrifying. See this innocent church with nothing wrong at all? What if I gave everyone watching this video nightmares for the rest of your lives with this? This was there the whole time. Insight is more fitting of the Lovecraftian world, but I think incorporating a similar system to other FromSoftware games would have been special, as Elden Ring even had Frenzy and Madness as an element. I mean, you even get an ending for the Frenzied Flame. Like, come on. Insight itself, I would argue, could have been expanded upon further. I'll go through some of my favorite interactions with it, but if this system doesn't get you a little excited for more,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that Insight was an underutilized mechanic of Bloodborne to begin with. I almost paused the video earlier to like make that comment, but I figured it's probably worth waiting. And then even Scowlezy brings it up in chat. Like, I think there's like, what, 6 or 7 tiny mechanics that most people don't even realize is associated with the Insight stat. One is like the lanterns get eyes and the dudes get extra attacks. Another one is the crucifix dudes have like a visible aura on their weapons. The scythe church servants suddenly get blue flames on their scythes and could deal magic damage to them. So those are like 3 things. You can see the little messengers. That's 4. 5 would be being able to hear Murgo's voice and the change in the Hunter's Dream music. So 6, or I guess that was 5 and 6. And then 7 would be the amygdala that you can see. And 8 would be the mad ones that you can see during the Witch of Hemwick fight, or conversely, getting rid of your insight and not being able to see them. So, like, still 8, I think. Was there any more insight stuff? I did say Murgo's voice. I mentioned the music changes. Amygdala. Oh, just the fact that it, like, kind of interacts with the beasthood mechanic slightly? Maybe that's about it. Yeah, okay. Oh, and this frenzy status, that's true. Yeah, I did mention the messengers. That was like the first or second thing I said. Although you might have put that in chat and I didn't see it. Most of the things change after 40 insight. You're not farming that much on purpose. It's still pretty easy to get that much insight, especially if you're not like buying things, if you're on a second playthrough or something like that. Hey Chadwick, nice to see you again. Henrik is wearing the Marquis outfit from Brotherhood of the Wolf. Just a fun tidbit. Yeah, actually, I meant to eventually get Brotherhood of the Wolf and like do a movie night on Discord, but that plan kind of fell through a while ago when I did a movie night showing off like A Nightmare on Elm Street, and then I couldn't like actually stream it from the PS5 because of like the stupid DRM on it. But now I have a card where I should be able to show that kind of footage. So maybe I'll look into doing a Brotherhood of the Wolf movie night in the future. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of one of the benefits of figuring out how to stream off the stupid PS TV. That was a real pain in the ass, but yeah. Brotherhood of the Wolf is on Tubi right now. Okay. I might like buy a DVD or Blu-ray. Actually, I heard that now Best Buy in the US is phasing out all of their physical media for Blu-ray discs. So I've outlived the VHS, the DVD, and the Blu-ray. Man, I am an ancient relic at this point. I don't know. Hey, without horns.
You might need a little hit of Madman's knowledge and get a whole lot more insane. For starters, these big guys with lamps now have eyeballs and new attacks from higher insight. You can't even talk to the doll in the Hunter's Dream without 1 insight.
Oh, I forgot one.
At 15 insight, you can find Gehrman talking in his sleep, and it's really sad.
Help me.
Is that actually the trigger? I am going to need to test that, or, you know, I'll say I'll need to test that and just not do it, because, anyway, I will try to take a mental note of that.
Unshackle me, please. Anybody. I've had enough of this dream.
I feel like
At
I need
30
to check
insight,
out
the
Mef's
win-
wiki, because I don't think that was there, and I don't know if this is wrong, I just never knew, like, what the trigger for that was specifically. Help you, Bella? Help you how?
Lanterns and
He has 1 insight in the clip. So you might be right, but it might just be triggered on once you get 15 insight total. The main thing is stacking insight is always a negative thing outside of lore / things you missed videos. Yeah, kinda.
enemy can be heard singing an off-key tone at a further distance.
I don't think that's true.
50 insight will make the Hunter's Dream theme change from this
Oh, so you're like making a joke with the
to this.
Hawkeye go rocks. Okay. Help me. Hey guys, look, it's the Erd tree.
60 makes a baby's cry heard off in the distance. And my favorite of all, if you fight the Witches of Hemwick, they are useless to you if you have 0 insight, as there are no shadow monsters because you have not gone mad enough to see the shadow monsters. But this fight will become increasingly more difficult the more insight you have. This also applies to that frenzy stat. The more insight, the faster you accumulate frenzy, which can be a massive pain. Now, if you want to lose insight, you have to just get sucked by the grossest enemy in the game.
I think my favorite Bloodborne video that I've ever seen is just titled "Please Stop" of some dude in Upper Cathedral Ward, right before the make contact gesture dude, where you have to fight the 2 brain suckers to get the key to like get in there and whatnot. I think throughout the video he ends up losing like something like 24 points of insight because he just keeps getting sucked after like healing himself. It's just, the title is just perfect because it's just one of those things. If you know, you know.
the brain suckers. Or you can buy items with insight from these cute little bath goblins. This system could have been pushed much further in future entries, and it's a giant mistake to have abandoned this element altogether. Can you imagine new ways to fight some of the Elden Ring bosses if a similar stat was there? Maybe more insight adds new attacks to bosses, and you will get higher rewards for the more insight you have. Maybe in Elden Ring it could scale with frenzied flame attacks.
So I think it is really easy to say that stuff in a vacuum, but I think one of the biggest difficulties that the designers of Elden Ring faced was trying to implement a reward system that felt good enough for the players to begin with. And I feel like it's because of such a system that we have such terrible rewards throughout the game, such as the smithing stones. And I feel like if the game was smaller, they might have had more freedom to innovate themselves away from the smithing stones or having multiple versions of the spirit tuning bell flower, the gloveworts, things like that.
Add risk reward much further the more you master Elden Ring. The only game that has an insight system is Lords of the Fallen. With its version coming from experience on weapons, you unlock more descriptions and build potential with them. But that's kind of lame. Lords of the Fallen definitely took a page from Bloodborne with the Land of the Dead, however, since it has one of the coolest mechanics with the lamp I have ever seen. And I would be shocked if the insight system wasn't one of the inspirations. It's time for FromSoft to make good on that and really bring insight back.
Yeah, I could only imagine how good a From Software level would be if they had something like the Umbral Lantern or the Umbral Lamp incorporated into it, or like a Metroid Prime 2 Shadow style world layered over the Light World or whatnot, or something similar. I'm just like trying to reimagine like Dark Souls 1, but extra and better. Hey, Special Noob, nice to see you again. So, Methoda always found it weird that the Hunter's Dream doesn't have its moon go red as the night progresses. Yeah, and although it's questionable how much it's meant to really be there, I do think in the second ending when you get got by the moon presence, that when you're looking at the moon with the doll and whatnot, there is a little red wisp of a cloud and whatnot, which I think is supposed to symbolize the moon presence kind of leaving the area after it gets you. So, yeah. Aside from that, the thing that's always bothered me about like the status of the moons is the fact that the moon in the not Hunter's Nightmare, the other one, the Nightmare of Mensis remains white throughout the night. Scally said that would be a nightmare. Boss movements changing without you likely knowing. Talk about creating salty players. Yeah, so I don't think everything that was in Bloodborne necessarily needed to be implemented into Elden Ring, although I can definitely understand the feeling of missing out of the potential of such a feature included into the game. And of course, my take on the whole how I would change Elden Ring would be having a more dynamic world that updated itself to the actions the player took. So I always bring it up that I think it'd be really cool. Like, what would happen if you killed Radon first, then Godric invaded North and like conquered Liurnia and took like Renala's powers, and then if you like skipped from Radon and then went into Altus Plateau and fought like Rykard, maybe Godric could go and fight Morgott or something like that. And then if you went from Rykard and then you fought Moog, maybe Godric, the little weak dude, would go up and freaking fight Millennia and beat her. That would be some really cool stuff to me. But yeah. Or like having like facing a souped up version of Malekith who's like defeated all the other demigods, like and like each of the bosses getting like a different move set that could correspond to the boss that they killed, or the overall levels and environments changing. So like if Godric goes up north and defeats Renala, maybe the flooding gets worse in Liurnia, or maybe it gets better. Or if you defeat Godric first, then maybe Liurnia becomes like more iced over because of like the influence of Ronnie or something like that. It's pretty much like the idea of the old Mega Man games, where if you beat Chill Penguin, then Flame Mammoth's fiery factory would get covered in ice, stuff like that. That would require Goodrick to not be a joke. And that's kind of my point. It'd be really cool if like the order of bosses that you fought could change them. So that way, if you like whatever boss you choose to fight last, that essentially becomes like the Uber version of that boss. And they're like never a pushover. So they could each kind of have like their own spotlight and encourage a lot more replayability other than getting a reskinned ending, which I'm still salty about, to be honest. Scaleasy says, Mortal Shell unlocks more uses and descriptions the more you use items. That's another one of those games that was on my radar that I wanted to play, but I never heard like enough glowing reviews to make me feel like I had to play it, so it just kind of fell off. Lightweight Gaming doing Bloodborne right now is her first FromSoft game. It's so fun because she's seeing it with new eyes. You can't wait for her to get the insight for the amygdala. Yeah, there's some pretty good compilations out there of people's reactions to amygdala. And so many people are just like, nope, 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 not doing it. It's absolutely great.
Insight and weapons. Two combinations that can grow ever so large. What happens when the best of the best are showcased? And what happens when From Software abandons these ideologies completely? Open the door and take your first steps towards insight combined with From Software's best trick weapons out there.
All right, isn't it bad that every time I see the stupid door animation, I'm like literally looking at the design to see if it's used in a freaking FromSoft game, and I'm trying to figure out the lore of the doors? This is what your brain looks like on lore.
Now, for how fantastic Bloodborne systems were, there were still bound to be some duds. Not to say they were bad, but they didn't offer the level of excitement others had. For starters, the threaded cane, which was one of 3 starter weapons in the game. It's at its best when you're constantly transforming this cane into a bladed whip, but it was really never that powerful or spectacular compared to others. This can be said for the rifle spear.
So that's a complete slandering and mischaracterization of the threaded cane that I will not stand for. How dare him? The threaded cane is the best as an R1 spam weapon to keep enemies staggered, but when you're facing beasts, it's good to use a transformed attack if they're kind of out of range from you using the R1 spam, or just merely dodging off to the side and attacking them from the sides with the untransformed R1 spam. The reason why it's a fantastic weapon is because it's the only starting weapon that has any thrust type damage, so you're still able to defeat kin with absolute ease. So those brain suckers which kill people, just press R2, bro. They'll fall over. Those Scourge Beasts, you could definitely attack them from a distance with the whip mode and deal a little bit extra serrated damage, but the consequence of that is you're not going to get nearly as many limb breaks, so it isn't as effective at bossing as something like the Saw Cleaver, or it's not as effective at completely staggering enemies as the axe. So it does have its own purpose. It's an incredibly versatile weapon, which I absolutely adore. It's my favorite starting weapon, and I kind of hate the Saw Cleaver mostly for the fact that it just scales too damn well with the Beast Blood pellets, and I more or less hate the Beast Blood pellets because it feels like an easy cheese button in the game that just kind of trivializes most content that I think BL4 players use as a crutch rather than actually getting good. Yeah, I said it. And I will say it from the comfort of never wanting to even attempt a BL4, but that doesn't mean I can't call out people for being soft when they use it. Yep. So if you've done a BL4 and you abused it, I guess you could say that I said you're soft, because I definitely did, but, you know, those are my feelings. You didn't actually go through on hard mode. But you don't have to. That's also the fun part of the games. Um, we can gatekeep each other as fans. It doesn't really matter. Just enjoy the game that you really want to enjoy. At the end of the day, it's your money. You do what you need to. Anyway, off that stupid soapbox there. Isn't that from the Resident Evil games? Instead of loading screens, they had creepy door opening scenes. I don't know where that door is from specifically. I do know it's supposed to be a play on the door that was on the Twilight Zone intros and whatnot. This is what your brain looks like on lore. You're not alone. Indeed. Use it as a cane. Okay, Tyler.
Powerful.
Oh no. Dayman. Ah. I don't want to like actually scream sing it because my dog will, awaken.
Or spectacular compared to others. This can be said for the rifle spear. You can imagine what that does. The other one would have been the Raider Palash, or Rider Palash, however you want to say it, tell me in the comments. And the church pick. But the pick is best used to slay enemies at Castle Canehurst, a secret snowy castle filled with the grossest spider ticks you will ever see. Get away from me. In this castle is where you will also discover the Palash, a rapier that transforms into a pistol rapier hybrid. Probably not one of the better transformations, but
It's funny, he already mentioned that, but couldn't pronounce it earlier either.
looks amazing. However, it definitely wins for PvP, as melee and shooting at the same time, while not showing your pistol, has the benefit of class and disguise. Plus, you could have two pistols at the same time, and who doesn't want that? Other than that, we have the Saw Cleaver and the Hunter Axe. Both starter weapons, but I would argue the Hunter Axe is one of the best weapons in the game, purely for the large range on the spin attack, even if it is a little basic and boring. Even though these...
Yeah, so even aside from the range, the charged R2 of the Hunter's Axe is obscenely powerful, if for no other reason than its monstrous, staggering knockdown effect on almost every enemy in the game. Like, you could cheese the hell out of Gascoigne with it. It's that good.
aren't the best, they felt unique and far better than many standard weapons we've gotten since. See, those are really just the ones you could argue are kind of boring, or even ready to be upgraded, like the Saw Spear is just a better Saw Cleaver. And while I love the Boom Hammer,
the Saw Spear in some ways I think is worse than the Saw Cleaver just because of like the scaling values, but I mean, they're kind of virtually identical weapons that just work off of different stats for the most part. And I believe, I might not be totally right on this, that the Cleaver just works better with strength, and that stat in general just works better with the Beast Blood pellets. And the Saw Spear is better for like the whole Dex Visceral type gameplay loop, maybe. I don't know.
there's no arguing that the Stake Driver is way more fun. Then we get into the weirder and more ambitious category. These weapons are so freaking cool, but they either offer a spectacle or a gimmick rather than pure dominant gameplay. You can already see how not including trick weapons in future entries has been a massive mistake, and you're also realizing that this was my trap card to get you to watch a video about trick weapons for this long. Since you've spent so much time here, why don't you subscribe, or I'll hit you with a Tonitrus. That's right, this is a simple yet gimmicky weapon. The Tonitrus saved me in the ROM fight. This is a Tesla coil on a mace, and it's very proud of being that. Want weirder and perhaps more gimmicky? How about I give you a hand? The amygdala arm was a funny way to upgrade the threaded cane. While the cane turned into a whip, so too did the arm, with its gross sounding fleshy smacks. I always loved the detail that it moves so disconnected, and apparently according to the lore of it, it is alive. Really just amazing stuff. The old hunters would even go on to take ideas that Bloodborne's base game of weapons offered and crank the dial to the point of pure frenzy. Like Simon's Bowblade, easily one of the most creative transformations.
It's kind of funny to like go from talking about the amygdalan arm to the Bowblade, because the amygdalan arm is also a DLC weapon.
Simon's Bowblade had a heavy emphasis on transformation. The normal blade looks like a curved sword, but the bow blade uses your ammo to deliver fast and striking blows. Funny enough, if you wanted more ammo but were out of silver bullets, you could blood tinge yourself for 5 extra shots at the cost of your health. If you scaled Simons with blood tinge for bloody arrows, it was even more powerful. This is the weapon to show your friends who never played Bloodborne. We are now entering the best of the best territory for both DLC and non-DLC, which I will lead off with the granddaddy of them all, Ludwig's Holy Blade. This might be the best weapon in the game pre-DLC, just for the pure versatility. This is a long, heavy sword that transforms into a straight sword with some of the most fluid moves you will ever see. If I haven't hammered in the point that FromSoft made a big mistake not bringing weapon transformations back, then it's best I Kirk hammer that point in. The Kirk hammer is—
I was wondering if the hammer line was going to be a pun. Yeah, I actually think I prefer the untransformed Kirk hammer to the untransformed Ludwig Holy Blade. I think it's just a little bit smoother, although that might just be a placebo effect. Why did that go off twice? Probably should stretch though. Okay.
Is this big block that also transforms into a straight sword. And if you use bolt paper on this hammer, it makes it look like Mjolnir. This is just as good as the Holy Blade, but it's missing the same lore impact of the name Ludwig. As when we finally meet the leader of the White Church Hunters, known for killing thousands of beasts, trapped in the old Hunter's nightmare realm, we find Ludwig, but he's not the same. Eventually, we deal enough damage that he reveals the longest running weapon in FromSoftware's history. The Moonlight Greatsword is without a doubt at its best in this game. The main reason, other than fighting Ludwig for it, is the transformation between its Moonlight state and its normal state,
He looks
and the
a bit
heavy attacks
off.
consuming
No,
ammo instead of mana from other entries. Something about the color, the presentation, and the raw power this greatsword has makes it stand out. It is beloved for a reason, and it's kind of broken in this game, since you can add more range to a game that's all about close combat. So, that unfortunately brings me to this haunting conclusion. Fans have tried to emulate transformation weapons. Most recently, the Cinders mod on Dark Souls 3 tried this, and it's just not the same. From needs to bring the game to PC with a proper remaster, because we may never see combat like this game again. Everyone praises the fantastic combat in these games, especially Sekiro, but I have seen almost nobody talk about how Bloodborne did the system right. I think that Miyazaki and FromSoft—
I feel like if he feels that way, he just might not be like looking very hard enough. And, you know, maybe that's just a bit rich coming from me, because obviously I spend a lot of my time doing it. And I'm not trying to like say, oh, just watch my channel because it's all I talk about. But no, I feel like there's a sizable portion of the FromSoft community whose favorite game is Bloodborne. So maybe he's just being hyperbolic just for the sake of making a point. Sony's decision, dude, not From's. Most of his point is BB is awesome and did this, so other games need to do it too, without exploring if it's a good idea and how the other games would implement them. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. Obviously, you know, some things sound a bit easier on paper than I think they ultimately would be. Like the insight mechanic would, you know, it probably needs a lot of time in the oven, and it could just as easily put people off a product as it could push them onto it. I don't know if that's how you should say it that way, but anyway, trick weapons I think could have been an elegant thing to include into Elden Ring, but I feel like that really wouldn't have alleviated Elden Ring's issues of not having things like the like limb breaks as common as Bloodborne, because I feel like limb breaks added a layer of depth to combat that is not talked about. So I do agree with him on this point, that I do think it should be talked about more often. So maybe I shouldn't have cut him off, but okay. Yeah, I'll just go back to the video now.
Soft are very particular on what they want to provide to the experience, and it doesn't always make a ton of sense for the games to share the weapon ideology of trick weapons, especially when you're talking about a fantasy land that doesn't really fit the theme. But some combination system would be greatly appreciated. I love every game in the Souls series, but in this video, we really talked about two of the larger reasons I keep coming back to Bloodborne. And most of all, these systems were so good that to me, it will always be seen as a major mistake that they were abandoned. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah, I don't know if these were necessarily abandoned, because they can be revisited in the future, but yeah, I get what he's saying. You know, he's just trying to make a point. Anyway, trick weapons, combat, limb breaks. So as I was saying a moment ago, I do think having limb breaks adds a lot more depth into combat, because if you think of facing an enemy like Dark Beast Parl, which is a little bit of a joke, but something more along the lines of the lore in Dark Beast, it does become an integral part of combat to mentally take note of what limb you're hitting, so that way you can initiate a kind of pseudo stagger moment where you break the enemy's limb and they stop attacking briefly so you can get more damage off. So because there were a lot less of those moments in Elden Ring, I feel like the overall pacing of combat was a little bit faster for the worse and a little bit more frenetic as well. Right. So one of the other issues that I wanted to talk about, I guess this isn't really like an issue. One of the topics I wanted to bring up was in relation to shields and whatnot. So he'd made a point. Let me look back real quick. Yeah, I don't exactly remember what he said. So Dark Souls 3 had shields, Bloodborne did not. And there was something that I wanted to build off of that. I think it was like around here. Anyway, I think because FromSoft deliberately chose to not have shields in Bloodborne, it opened them up to approaching combat in a different way, which kind of like influenced or like informed them more of like certain design decisions to go with for a game like Sekiro. And those kind of insights weren't ported into Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3 for whatever reason. I don't think it's necessarily like too important, but I think one thing that's kind of easy to forget about Bloodborne is that its movement was kind of revolutionary in comparison to Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, although I don't know how fair of a comparison that is, in that it shuffled away from the whole like cardinal degree aspects and you're able to quick step a bit more. So I think like them moving away from shields and focusing on more aggressive movement and whatnot had a lot more impacts to the feel of the game under the hood, which is not talked about as much. So I am a little bit sad that he didn't go into more detail about why he thinks combat is great, other than just making a blanket statement that Bloodborne's combat was great. Which, I mean, I agree with the overall like conclusion, but I don't know what premises he built that off of. As a Rikuyo guy, you prefer simpler weapons. I don't feel like that statement really works on its own. It feels a little oxymoronic. But anyway, the boom hammer is multiplying 2 by 2 while Rikuyo is doing calculus in your head. Boom hammer's your favorite King of the Hill character? Oh yeah. The only shield in Bloodborne being trash is because Bloodborne is designed to be played aggressively. Yes. And so I think not having shields facilitated them having more of a dynamic range of movement. Obviously, by not having shields, they're able to incorporate the firearms, which is a good or a bad thing. Like, they feel a little bit too weak for traditional firearms, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't have taken that idea and like worked with it and iterated on it in some other capacity, whether that be like wands and spells like the Karian type stuff for future titles or whatnot. I don't know. But yeah, otherwise, like I think trick weapons are great and they added a lot of depth to combat as well. because of their transformation attacks, knowing that saw cleavers R1, L1 is more likely to stagger an enemy than just an R1, R1. It adds a certain level of player expression and player skill that is not going to be apparent for new players, but it is very abundantly clear if you ever go into a brand new playthrough of like a Bloodborne stream, who has played the game before versus who has not. And one of my favorite aspects of that ties into the whole rally mechanic, because veteran players will abuse the hell out of it, because you should, whereas like new players just don't understand what's going on. And I think the weapons like the Chikage taking away life and stuff, I think that the FromSoft can learn more from Lords of the Fallen with the whole like withered HP mechanic, and I really hope they just kind of steal that idea and iterate on it in like future titles, because I think that would really make those types of weapons a hell of a lot more viable and feel a lot less punishing. And it could also potentially work really well with the idea of emergency bullets, because Lords of the Fallen has kind of a similar build enabling item, which will allow you to kind of use ranged attacks ad nauseum. And as soon as you run out of ammo, you'll start using your effective HP to feed yourself ammo. But you can always restore your effective HP by rallying enemies by hitting them, which kind of turns into this really cool feedback loop of you're using your health as your ammo, but because you're hitting your enemy with your weapon, you're regaining that health back. So it just kind of becomes like a self-sustaining type thing. So maybe that's a little bit too strong for like a FromSoft game, but it's just really cool to me how such a simple design element can kind of what's the word? Innovate? Put in a new perspective the game. I'm trying. There's like a word that I'm failing to grasp right now. So redefine. Yeah, that's the word. It can totally redefine how a player can approach the game, which I think is really cool. So even though I do think like Lords of the Fallen does have some problems, there's a lot of good in it. Just is like how Dark Souls 1 was kind of janky and does have like a couple bad things in it, but overall like it helped, define a new genre. So yeah, looking forward to the future of the genre in as a whole, I suppose. Yeah, and as Stella said, there's only the one shield, but there's actually two, with the wooden plank and the lock shield. Simple as in you can learn it what it does easily, and then you learn to master it in your head. Yeah. So Sekiro is a very simple game that's extremely hard to master. So okay, let's go and finish out the video now.
Sometimes mistakes aren't traditional. Sometimes mistakes find themselves in the way of something good. From Software may have made a mistake by abandoning the weapon system and the insight system, but it doesn't mean it's too late. Bloodborne on PC may be in another universe, but Bloodborne will be forever. I hope you're ready to open up the next door into the next episode of Evan Explains.
All right, so that was an interesting video, although I felt like it was a little bit light on the details at times, and a lot of the audio stuff kind of annoyed me, so I'm actually not going to like it. I feel like I'm subscribing. Subscribing. Anyway, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to go ahead and share it with you guys in the chat. Let me look at what other videos they have, though, because there might be more stuff that I'm interested in. And that was The Worst Mistake in FromSoft History by Evan Explains. Dark Souls Explained, he changed everything. The boss that changed Souls forever. Elden Ring then versus now. Unforgettable Experience. Chaos Took the World. Oh, so maybe he does lore stuff. Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead and sub to him. And maybe look at some of those in the near future. Or maybe the later future if I'm actually like streaming games. Anyway. Alright. So if you guys want to give Evan a like or a sub, feel free to follow the link. There you go, Bella. Bella, you need to become a channel member. So wait, did I ever actually? I did. You need to become a channel member so you could actually use the flame emote. How do I get rid of this thing now? Bruh. Oh, I need to click that. Okay. I'm an idiot. You need the real fire emote. Okay. So, let's go ahead and go into our next video. Why does Dark Souls sound like Dark Souls? So we're finally getting to this after like a week of putting it off because of just running out of time. So, very excited for this one. And where's Crunchy? I know he's very interested in this video as well. The lock shield saves your ass against the cursed chalice Ram. I've never really used it just because it's kind of awkward changing weapons, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which I think is like kind of one of the bigger design issues in like the FromSoft games is a lot of the upgrades are prohibitively expensive, and so it just kind of funnels people into using what they're used to because it's too expensive to change things on the fly. Once you're financially stable, perhaps in an alternate universe, I think. Actually, I don't know how this works. I don't want to do it on stream in case like weird stuff comes up. Hold on, give me a moment. So I think now YouTube has enabled gifted channel memberships, and I might like gift you the dollar tier if it works. Give me a moment. I'll do this like off the BRB screen to see if it works or see if it can, and we'll see. We'll be right back. And then this is the kind of noob trap setup killer. If we try to come this way, the boulder comes crashing through, and then you just fight a bunch of Cabra demons, a bunch of Taurus demons, and so having another recycled. Why is that back now? Well, you got by the. All right. That was random and not exactly what I expected. But apparently I could gift subs like just as a channel thing. But it was totally random. I like clicked the button to see if there's going to be like another prompt that went with it. And it did not hit Bella, unfortunately. So she cannot let chaos take the world. Where's my emotes? They're like gone now. Oh, there they are. Wait. There they are. So, get wrecked, Bella. I'm sorry. I'll need to like look into that a bit more. Tyler dodged a sub. Hey. So yeah, congrats to everybody who got lucky with the lotto, I suppose. And thanks for checking out the streams and being in the chat. And congrats on the sub. Hope you enjoy the emotes and the goofy little channel badge, which I should probably punch up someday. That's some cosmic irony. No, that's just the chaos. Bella wouldn't have it any other way. No, I didn't spend a cent on those, Bella. That just is a YouTube freebie that I had no idea about. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive on into Why Does Dark Souls Sound Like Dark Souls by 8-Bit Music Theory? Yeah, 8-Bit Music Theory.
Whether you're playing Dark Souls or Elden Ring or Bloodborne or even Demon's Souls, the music of the Souls series evokes a consistently depressing atmosphere that colors and fleshes out each game's world. To maintain such a consistent sonic identity, the music follows a musical formula that consistently gets at that somber, nihilistic tone the series is so perfect at conveying. So today, let's take a look at some of the principles behind the Souls series music and prepare to dissect what makes it work. The first and most obvious musical contribution to the atmosphere of these games is that there is no music for like 90% of the experience. The music is saved for a handful of key locations throughout each game as well as...
Sorry, I forgot to put the closed captions on. And also, congrats to the next 5. So apparently I have like 10 a month that I can give, which is a lot more than I would have expected. I don't know if people can like gift subs directly, so I'll try to like look into it a bit more. But congrats on Scowlazy, Mercy, Errant Vice, Jesse R, Nightmare, Methoda on becoming honorary channel members. And oh yeah, the other ones were Without Horns, Salamonkey, uh, Wavar, Vivar, Alfarius, and Methoda. Congrats, everybody. May chaos take the world.
As each of the many boss encounters. But for just about the entire journey between these key places, you'll find no background music to be found. This colors the whole experience of playing the game. There's a thick sense of hopelessness that runs through each game, a gloom that haunts every aspect from the settings to the plot to the action, and somehow getting your head chopped off by a skeleton for the 50th time with no music to accompany it whatsoever drives home this feeling of nihilism more than any score could ever hope to. The second musical contribution to the series' atmosphere is the approach to orchestration, which is extremely consistent across the series. The sounds of string orchestra and choir singing nonsense Latin-sounding syllables make up the primary colors in the orchestral palette, with low brass and pounding timpani mixed in when the music needs to push you into full-throttle panic mode, and harp used when the music needs to reassure you that it's okay, you're in one of the few truly safe places in the game. Different pieces will emphasize one or another of these elements above the rest, and Sekiro naturally sprinkles a healthy dose of traditional Japanese instruments on top, but generally speaking, the choir and strings define the sound of these games.
Yeah, and I think it's because... Hey, Stella, thanks for the 5 memberships. Oh, you can get... Wait, was that random for you too? Thanks for the gifted members. I appreciate that. What was I saying? Okay, so it's random. That's so weird. Maybe there's like some Gamba strat that the mega minds at Google are trying to approach. Anyway, yeah. So because there's not a lot of ambient music in the Dark Souls games, I do agree with 8-Bit Music Theorist here that it kind of helps set the tone for like a kind of like nihilistic worldview. Oh, damn, Methoda, thanks for the 5 memberships. I appreciate that. You guys are crazy. So is that stuff free for you guys? Are you like using YouTube Premium? Is this a thing? Or what have I done? Yeah, so I feel like part of the reason that Dark Souls and whatnot is so impactful is because they do lack a lot of backing tracks, and I think that can also help make the bosses stand out even more than they do. Sometimes it's for better or for worse. Like the Moonlight Butterfly has like a music track. It's got that haunting oh melody with like the chorus and whatnot, which does help differentiate it, but then it just kind of gets reused and loses a bit of its charm for like the Gwendolyn fight. And or you could say like the other way around, that the Gwendolyn theme gets used for the Moonlight Butterfly. The same thing there as well. So I've got some pretty mixed feelings about the overall tracks of the games, just because I feel like many of them really end up blending together and they're too bombastic, and because of that, a lot of the tracks just don't really stand out or differentiate from each other. And if I say that in a vacuum, I'm sure like some people will get mad, like, oh no, I really love Gwen's theme. I really like that one. And I feel like sometimes people are like more fixated on their favorites rather than looking at the whole picture, where like I can't really tell apart like the old Iron King boss music from King Allant, from hold on, let me look at some of the Dark Souls 2 ones specifically. Dark Souls 2, I actually think Dark Souls 2 has probably one of the better soundtracks for the Dark Souls games, but a lot of them feel really familiar. Oh, or Velstadt, that's a really like bombastic one. Sin, the Slumbering Dragon, Burnt Ivory King. Yeah, like a lot of those like just sound really generic, and it's really hard for me to place them if like I'm not looking at the title of what's playing specifically. You making Scowly's laptop lag? We're all failing to get Bella. May stability keep the world how it is? No, no, it's chaos, man. Yeah, so I would say that Gwyn's theme in particular is one of the standout tracks where it doesn't fit the overly bombastic nature of some of the other boss fights, where it just kind of congeals into a generic wall of brass and like chorus. So Dark Souls 1 does do a good job of having like a couple more memorable boss fight themes. So one of my absolute favorites is the Great Grey Wolf Sif's boss music. Gwyn's music is fantastic for that. And those are the ones that like really stand out to me. And I don't remember a lot of the other boss music, to be honest. So, okay. Yeah, and like I was saying a moment ago, because everything else is silent, it does help make some of the boss music stand out. But the other side of that coin is a lot of the boss music just kind of ends up sounding the same. So yeah, I don't know. I've really conflicted feelings, and so for me, like the Dark Souls soundtracks aren't nearly as iconic as like most of the Final Fantasies. Mostly anything composed by Shimomura Yoko. She's done some Final Fantasy. She's done the Mana series, like Legend of Mana, Sword of Mana. She also did the Street Fighter soundtrack, or some of them at least. Like she composed the Blanca's theme, you know. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive on back into the video. Yeah, Kingdom Hearts, exactly. 8-Bit Music Theory also has a vid on Gwyn's theme specifically. Cool, maybe I'll check that out. Aside from Gwyn's theme, the only memorable one you can think of is Vort. That's funny because I can't even picture Vort at all, but that might also be because like his boss fight is really short. Short Vort. Calamite Artorias. Yeah, those don't stand out to me. Like that doesn't mean that they aren't standout tracks. I just couldn't place them if you asked me to. Like I couldn't even begin to try to hum a theme or anything. Abyss Watchers, that one I think is a little bit better. Even though like parts of it are like a bit louder and bombastic, at least it has like an actual like theme going on that can kind of like stick out into my mind. But that I wonder if part of that is because it has like a cutscene where it can like slow down and allow me to better appreciate it for a moment. So I like Alon's theme, but I think that one is slightly too bombastic, and it's hard for me to differentiate it from Burnt Ivory King. Okay.
This is what gives the music its seriousness. Removing the lighter sounds from the orchestra, like winds and high brass, keeps the palette dark, and filling their role in the ensemble in with fake Latin chanting choir makes the music feel ancient. It's perfect for the crumbling ruins and characters with troubled pasts that inhabit these worlds. In Dark Souls 3's Iudex Gundur theme, the high choral chords that open the piece give way to a somber string melody.
So Jasper says Ludwig and Bloodborne always stuck with you. Yeah, and I guess I should have mentioned this as I was talking about like a lot of these themes. A lot of it really depends on the composer that did it, and I'm trying to remember her name, but she's just the composer for Sekiro, she just kind of left FromSoft a couple months ago. And when I was looking back through the tracks, I realized that I really wasn't that big of a fan of hers because the tracks that I complained about being like very bombastic in nature, I think by and large were done by her. And the ones that stand out, or to me, were not done by her. So I guess I'm like not too sad that happened. So for example, Gwyn's theme was not done by her. Ludwig's theme I think is like one of the best boss themes that they've done. That was also not done by her. I'm really bad at remembering who composed what, especially on like multi-composer soundtracks, especially since I don't really listen to like the Dark Souls music's soundtrack like beyond the context of the game. so I'm not nearly as familiar with it as I should be. But just to give like a bit more context, I think Demon Souls is a lot more cohesive for me as like a product because there's more personality to it. Like I can associate the Phalanx theme more easily with the Phalanx because it has like a more distinct feel to it to me than a lot of the more recent titles, perhaps. Yuka Kitamura. Okay, so I was thinking Kitamura, but I couldn't remember her essentially first name. You feel the exact opposite? That's awesome. Yuka did Renala's boss theme? Interesting. Okay. So I'm not trying to say like she's trash and I hate everything. I'm just saying that like I've noticed a trend where when I feel like the boss music gets a bit too bombastic, that I think Kitamura has been the composer for them. And I'm not always a fan of that, which isn't to say that I don't enjoy bombastic boss tracks, but I feel like they're a little bit overused and kind of run together for me personally. She did an album with noted Souls remixer Alex Rowe. Interesting. Okay. Sorry to, sidetrack the video so much. I'm going to back up so we could, start this point again. Oh no, we got the buffering thing.
Perfect for the crumbling ruins and characters with troubled pasts that inhabit these worlds. In Dark Souls 3's Iudex Gundur theme, the high choral chords that open the piece give way to a somber string melody.
It's kind of funny.
This ancient, hopeless...
Because this is kind of like one of the examples that I mean. Like, I don't think this is too bad, but it just kind of eventually feels generic Dark Souls to me. Like, I feel like if this is on its own in a different game, it could be really good, but it just kind of blurs together in my mind when I listen to a lot of these songs together. And you're welcome without horns. It was actually a random chance, so... You should thank the Google slot machine.
This gloominess that pervades these themes means that the harmony has to be minor, minor, minor. You'd be hard-pressed to find a major chord anywhere in these games. Here we swim around a G minor chord for basically the entire piece, with the melody walking up from the root to the third and jumping up to the fifth to clearly outline this G minor sound.
And I do actually, even though I just said it gets bombastic, I was kind of talking about the beginning more specifically, but I do appreciate when it's just kind of strings and not stepping all over itself.
Gorgeous string orchestration isn't afraid to sit on neighboring tones within the G minor scale, using the flat sixth and the second of the key to access the devastating sound of the Aeolian mode, or natural minor scale.
So Jasper Patterson says, the bombastic songs will always have more impact if there's more of them because it makes you sit up and take notice. If they're overused, they start to lose their individuality and character. Yeah, that's said very well, and I wish I articulated it that well, because that's kind of a very good encapsulation of my feelings about it.
The first hunter from Bloodborne similarly dives deep into the minor scale.
And I think Garamond's theme is a really good example of something standing out because it has more breathing room, and it's bombastic, but not overly bombastic. So I don't know how well I'm articulating that. So hopefully you guys are picking up what I'm putting down.
Garamond, the first hunter from Bloodborne, similarly dives deep into the minor scale, laying down a low bass drone on the tonic D note for huge chunks of the piece. Underneath the cello melody outlining simple D minor figures and the inner voice stepping around to more colorful notes from the D minor scale, this bass creates an oppressively dark atmosphere.
And this shouldn't be a surprise that I like Garamond's theme. I use it partly for my intro. And let me know if it's a little bit too
There's
loud for you
something
guys
about
or
the
not.
sound of the minor key that can feel profoundly dark. If you look at all of the individual parts of Gehrman's theme here, it's incredibly simple. The melody is walking up a D minor scale, the inner voice is moving away from and then resolving back to the third of the key, and the bass is, of course, just sitting on the root. But even though it's simple, it allows for a level of expression from the performers that makes it truly powerful. Sticking so stubbornly to the tonic minor chord like this creates the sense that we can't escape the darkness, which I think could accurately describe the main narrative theme of just about every Souls game.
I like that final line there because that helps give more contextualization of what he means in reference to like specific chords. Because I feel pretty conflicted because part of me does wish to know more about music theory because I enjoy music quite a bit. But I also feel like the downside of that is by knowing too much music theory, it tends to... I get the sense that it would like potentially kill a lot of my passion and just kind of trivialize a lot of my feelings about music. So I'm a little bit reticent to do it as well. It feels a little bit too much of a practice in mental masturbation sometimes, in that like people who talk about it just kind of sound a bit circle jerky, which I'm not trying to say like that's how 8-bit music theorists or whatever. I don't think they necessarily sound like that here, but for a layman, it is kind of hard to follow exactly what they feel the significance of each chord is until they use lines like the last one that they did right there.
Now, we're not just sitting on one minor chord for most of the music in these games, of course, but when we do see other chords, we see the music take a very specific approach, centering on the sound of the dominant 5 chord. The dominant 5 chord in a minor key, using the raised 7th of the key rather than the flat 7 natural to the minor scale, is a sound that dates back hundreds of years and can evoke a dark classical style that fits perfectly with the settings of each of these games. Nothing in the Souls games feels cutting edge. Everything feels like it's been there for thousands of years and is way past its prime. It's a very old and very basic technique, but when used properly, the dominant 5 chord can surpass the basic gloom of the natural minor scale and get to a real sense of despair. It's an essential part of the sound of the Souls series, especially when used with a specific twist. Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls gives us a perfect example. The harp and strings spell out a progression from the 1 chord, E minor, to the 4 chord, A minor, held over the tonic E in the bass. It then moves to a B7 chord before resolving back to the home chord of E minor.
Yeah, and Firelink is also one of those very memorable tracks. And I think part of it is because it's like particularly a memorable song, as much as it is like one of the very few places of respite in the entire trilogy. And so it gives players a little bit of breathing room in a very oppressive game otherwise. So... Exactly.
This 5-to-1 cadence has a real finality to it, a real hopelessness that totally fits the character of the game, and you'll notice 2 interesting things about this B7 chord that add to the Dark Souls sound. 1, it has the flat 9th of the chord on top, a C note, making it a B7 flat 9 chord. And 2, it has the 3rd of the chord in the bass, D sharp. Now, borrowing the raised 7th scale degree in a minor key means that if you build up a chord based on this raised 7th, you'll get a diminished 7 chord. In E minor, this would be a D sharp diminished 7. And if you compare this chord to our B7 flat 9 that we saw just before, you'll see that the 2 chords are identical apart from the inclusion of the 5th of the key, in this case, B. Because of this, the 5-7 chord in a minor key is functionally identical to the diminished chord based off of the raised 7th, as they contain all of the same notes. Look at this section from the Tower Knight theme from Demon Souls. This great jagged diminished chord riff in the strings outlines an E flat diminished 7 chord, and then after 4 bars, the phrase continues with the bass note shifted down to D underneath. The diminished riff doesn't change at all, but having a D note anchor it turns it from a diminished chord into a D7 flat 9 chord that resolves to G minor. You'll note that because of the symmetrical nature of the diminished chord, E flat diminished is equivalent to F sharp diminished is equivalent to A diminished and C diminished.
So yeah, something like this, it does have like elements of bombast to it, but I don't think it's like overly bombastic by any means, and it kind of gives you a certain feel that's just not over the top, and it just kind of works for what it is, I think.
This is a perfect example of how similar the 7 diminished and dominant 5 chords really are, and how the diminished sound of the 5-7 flat 9 chord can add a more aggressive edge to your usual 5-1 cadence. The Souls games do use dominant 5 chords like this, but more often than not they'll be inverted in some way to prevent us from totally getting the cadence's satisfying finality.
I wonder if he's going to talk about any specific composers, or if he's just, talking about the series in general, which, I mean, either case would make sense, but I'm curious if he's deliberately, like, chosen the same composer at times, or if it's just, all random.
Godskin Apostles theme from Elden Ring uses minor 1, 4, and 7 diminished chords all over a tonic E flat bass pedal. Again, using the 7 diminished is functionally the same as the dominant 5 chord, so you can think of these D diminished chords as basically being B flat 7s. But putting a D diminished triad over an E flat bass note rather than a B flat bass note makes such a great crunchy sound.
So yeah, Godskin Nobles and Apostles theme is definitely bombastic, but I think this works a lot better for me just because the brass is kind of lower. It feels a lot more regal.
I also
it's
want
slower,
to
it's
point out
deliberate.
here the way these boss themes tend to rock back and forth between huge, loud intensity and more subdued, quieter phrases. These pieces tend to be structured in 8 or 16 bar phrases and aren't afraid to drop the dynamic way down low for a phrase before bringing it crescendoing back up to an eruption of intensity. I particularly love this passage that isolates a couple vocalists harmonizing a melody that moves from the tonic E flat minor to the much brighter sounding F minor, borrowing that raised sixth of the key, C natural, before sinking back down to a natural minor sound with a darker A flat minor chord.
This guy, that's hard to hear me. Alright, I turned it down slightly because it does sound like the audio for these musical portions is slightly louder. And his audio is low as well.
Grey Wolf Sif's theme from Dark Souls uses tons of dominant 5 chords in first inversion, putting the third of the chord in the bass, much like what we saw in Firelink Shrine's music earlier.
So yeah, I absolutely adore the great Grey Wolf Sif theme. It's one of my absolute favorites from pretty much all of the franchises at this point. But going back to like the Godskin Noble stuff, as Jasper had like mentioned before, I don't necessarily think it's even limited to tracks kind of sounding. Hold on, how do I say that? Like multiple tracks kind of sounding overly bombastic. I think this is an inter-track problem as well, like where sometimes a song or a piece isn't given enough breathing room to make it memorable, which I think is kind of comparable at times to how the Dark Souls games, they don't have music or ambient music when you're like in most areas, so whenever you do get ambient music, it kind of tends to stand out a hell of a lot more. Like everybody remembers going to Ash Lake because Ash Lake is different, and the reason why they remember Ash Lake as opposed to all the other ones is because the other areas were silent and gave you that space to be able to even appreciate what Ash Lake is. And this kind of goes back into some of the whole like lore stuff, like dichotomy and disparity, and kind of goes back to that analogy that I've talked about on stream a number of times, in that what allows a piece of clay to function as a cup isn't necessarily the form of the cup as much as it is the emptiness of the cup, which kind of turns it into the cup. So there is kind of like that play of it. And that's kind of often been compared to music as well, in which silence is just as important as like the actual beat of the note or whatnot. And I think just that principle works really well in like the Godskin Nobles track, because you have the more somber parts where the chorus is kind of doing its thing. There's only a couple strings to accompany it. And then it builds into a crescendo that goes into like the big ass chorus and like a lot more orchestration. So it becomes a bit more memorable because it is more subdued at times. Maybe I just don't like her style. Godskin theme was Tai Tomisawa. Kinemura only did about a third of Elden Ring's music, so maybe I just don't like her style. So I mean, I think it's complicated in general. I think when she's not doing a lot of the boss music, I'm more amicable to some of the things that she's worked on. Although to be fair, I wasn't the biggest fan of Sekiro's music. But that's because I have a chip on my shoulder, because when you go to Senpo Temple, the ambient music has like people chanting. And when I was first going through the area, I was like constantly swiveling my camera around because I was like, is a monk attacking me? But that's like not too important. Yeah, I guess I'm not really as much of a fan of her personally, which is why it didn't really bother me too much to learn that she was leaving FromSoft, because I was more particular to the other composers' music that I've heard so far. Your buddy Rowan had no idea what a greater than or less than signs were. That's funny. I remember being in like fourth grade and whatnot, and like drawing little teeth on the signs to help differentiate what the sign essentially meant, just because it was fun and cute to do, I suppose.
Notice again the way the music breaks down to a lower dynamic and sparser texture before building back up to the intensity of the full ensemble. These first in version 5 chords do resolve up to their tonic 1 chords, but they're also used in the Souls series to slide down to the flat 7 of the key in a kind of fake-out move. This later section of Sif's theme sees the tonic of the moment, E minor, move to a B over D sharp chord, which slides down to a D chord before returning up to a B7 flat 9 over D sharp that resolves back to E minor.
Yeah, the musical sections for these are just way louder than his voice. It's kind of hard to listen to be honest. So I don't know how well balanced it is for you guys either, because it doesn't sound great for me either.
The B7 flat 9 over D sharp, just like what we saw in Firelink Shrine, accesses the unstable and aggressive diminished chord sound by adding the flat 9th C to mimic a D sharp diminished 7 chord. Actually, this example is more crunchy than a straight up diminished 7 chord would be.
The music's a bit loud still? Okay, thank you.
B and the flat 9th C.
Is it just the music? How is his voice? Because the music is loud for me.
Pretty strictly to these kinds of chord progressions, variations on 5-1 and 7-1 cadences creates such a strong sonic identity for the series. But such a limited harmonic palette could start to get old across a series of soundtracks. To create more
His voice is okay, that's what I was afraid of.
Without
All right.
compromising the established.
All right, I'm gonna bump the sound up a little bit so the music is just going to be loud, because that's just kind of how his video is. So I apologize if my voice is quiet in comparison. I'll try to actually pause the video more if I'm talking when it's just purely the music, because yeah, I get that. And thanks for letting me know if there's audio issues going on. Yeah, I also really adore the DS1 character creation music. I'm actually really salty that the Dark Souls remaster gets rid of the character selection screen music on the title screen. Scowleezy says, DS1 has more songs than Plin Plin Plon and Firelink Shrine. Dang, you learn something new every day.
established harmonic identity of the series, lots of pieces will change keys on a dime, throwing out the same kind of 5-7-1 moves in a variety of minor keys in quick succession, especially in the tracks written by Motoi Sakuraba, who did the entirety of Dark Souls 1 and most of Dark Souls 2. These key shifts can be pretty insane. Thankfully, diminished 7 chords work wonderfully for changing keys, their instability translating to a flexibility that proves very useful for this. Dark Souls 2's theme for Sin, the Slumbering Dragon, starts off with big, grandiose orchestra chords giving us a G major that turns sour and becomes a G minor.
Yeah, that is just way louder than his voice. I'm assuming people have like left comments, but I'm probably going to as well. I guess it's not up here. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely leave him a comment just so he gets the feedback. Sakuraba also did Star Ocean 3. Oh wait, Sakuraba did a lot of Star Ocean stuff, didn't they? I don't think he just did 3. So it was comically opposite of DS1. I do like... So Star Ocean is like one of those ones where it's almost there for me, but not quite. And it's hard to explain why. Like some of the more like power metal stuff is fine. I don't know. Like it's so difficult to talk about those tracks specifically. Like I like a lot of the Star Ocean stuff, but it just feels like it's missing that little bit of oomph to get it like at the same tier as like an Uematsu track or something like that. Yeah, I think he's the main composer. I don't know if he worked on a lot of the Star Oceans after Star Ocean 3 or not. I know there's like a lot of different directions that the game took after those ones. So I might like look into that a bit more later. And it is kind of funny to think that he did Dark Souls as well as Star Ocean. I never thought about that. Oh god. Alright, I'm turning it down.
This opening statement gives way to a series of key changes that eventually dumps us in the key of A minor, and we see this A minor chord dip down to a G sharp diminished 7, which sets up a resolution back to A minor. But instead of this resolution, we slip down another half step to G minor, and then move to C minor in what feels like a solidification of G minor as the new home key. This C walks down to an A7 flat 9 almost immediately though, which resolves to a D minor chord, which then immediately shifts to a C diminished 7 to bring us back to that initial grandiose statement.
So I don't know if it's like the instrumentation or like the software used to render the music, but it just kind of always sounded like a little bit of a mess to me. Maybe it's the chorus, maybe it's just like the song itself, the way that it's composed. But well, I don't dislike the Sin theme specifically. This is kind of emblematic of some of the issues that I have with like a lot of the FromSoft boss tracks in general, where it's just kind of like got a lot going on, but kind of says very little at the same time. Isn't that Space Jam?
The theme for everyone's favorite gruesome twosome, Ornstein and Smo, takes us through the keys of G minor, E minor, F minor, and F sharp minor, all through just 16 bars.
And now, like, for me, his voice sounds ridiculously quiet, especially after that ear blasting of the Sin theme. I'm gonna turn it up for you guys.
Melody that walks straightforwardly up the minor scale, while the harmony dips down to a first inversion 5 chord, this D over F sharp. This smoothly transitions to a D sharp diminished 7 chord that brings us to the key of E minor, jumping to our new first inversion 5 chord, B over D sharp, before pivoting back to G minor where we started. This last D over F sharp facilitates a smooth bass step down to F to bring us to the key of F minor, where we get a longer walk down from the 1 chord to the 5 chord, C, setting up a jump back to F minor. But we overshoot that resolution just a hair and end up in F sharp minor, trading the tonic chord with its 7 diminished E sharp diminished 7. This once again facilitates a smooth step down to an E chord, and the bass keeps walking down to get us to a C sharp diminished 7. After this, the piece breaks down to a quieter organ solo section back to the first key of G minor. See if you can follow along with all of these key changes here.
Yeah, this one definitely gives me a bit of a Star Ocean feel now that you pointed out. Yeah, like that little expression right there at the end. I definitely get those vibes. So, Ornstein and Smoke's theme, even though I do think it is really bombastic, this one kind of just works better for me. Maybe because it's a bit more thematic with the way that it's layering the chorus over like the drums and the brass, and it's a little bit less of a wall and a bit more of a cohesive sound for me. Oh, and of course it slows down, so it gives it a bit more space to stand out.
This music doesn't let up any more than the bosses who it accompanies do.
Turning it up again.
Whether it's hectic boss themes, poignant story-heavy battles with tragic figures, or a rare place of rest in a dangerous world, the music that runs through the Souls games sticks to a very specific sound to create the perfect atmosphere for their worlds. These games are full of broken characters and tragic, hopeless settings, and it's no easy feat to capture the gravity of these games' themes with such tact. Surprisingly, even with using such a limited palette of musical colors and techniques, the series manages to create a ton of unique, hauntingly beautiful tracks with each release. Much like the design of each game, the skeleton is always pretty much the same, even as the details change. But it's such a great skeleton that we just can't get enough, no matter what the details are on top. Big thanks to patron Daigo for requesting a Souls series overview. If you want to see my full transcriptions for the tunes shown in the video, head on over to my Patreon and become a $5 supporter. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Now, despite like the audio issues, I'm going to go ahead and like the video. Let me go ahead and share it with you guys in the chat if you want to give 8-Bit Music Theory a like or a sub. Turn down that music, you'll spoil your focus. Get wrecked. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and check out what else they have to look at. It's like the Aeolian mode feels devastating. I might just like look at this on my own on like my less business channel. I don't know. So anyway, this is the link for the video. Go ahead and show them some support if you'd like. I'm going to leave that comment. Hey man, I really, with a capital I really enjoyed the video, but at times the audio balancing made it really difficult to hold on. But the audio transitions between your voice and the music tracks was a bit painful. I don't know. But the audio transitions between your voice and the music between your voice and the music felt a bit too abrupt, and that the BGM was way louder, which this also made it more difficult to understand what you were saying. Other than that, great job. It was interesting, but I'm also curious if the DS sound was more limited to specific composers. I know you mentioned Sakuraba, but were these kinds of sounds more limited to just his work, or were they found throughout all of the composers' work? Good luck in the future. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like it's good enough. 8 out of 10, you are more focused on this bar of dark chocolate. Getting to watch someone try to write a polite criticism is ironically riveting gameplay. Feels maybe that's like one of the next indie titles. Like there was that one indie game where like make an indie game where you unironically like make an indie game to like send out to audiences and whatnot. So maybe there's a market for this. Only Sakuraba did for DS1. Yeah, but what about like DS2 and 3? I would need to like look. And I know Demon Souls, there's also like the remake to consider. So, okay. And I don't know if that's just like what was credited, because I thought that I heard that there were other people who contributed for DS1. Maybe I'm misremembering, or maybe my sources were wrong. It's possible. All right, Jasper. Yeah, no, absolutely. This is about the time that I typically end anyway. So I hope you have a good day, and thanks for making it to the stream and for watching the VODs. I appreciate that. You have a good one. All right, everybody. So, as I just said, this is typically about the time I end stream, so I managed to get the right videos in order today. So, for all of you who've joined in, thank you very much. I appreciate it. For all of you who won the gift chat lottery, congratulations. I would also, damn, who gifted the other subs? I should have like wrote your name down. Methoda did. Okay. So the cool thing is I did go in earlier today and like adjusted my settings so that way I could credit people on the fly for like donos and channel memberships. So you should be able to see your name on the credits, hopefully. And hopefully I stay on top of that, because it's kind of a pain in the ass to keep that stuff up to date, and I should be better about it, especially since you guys are being kind enough to support the channel. So, all right, hopefully that will do. So, reminder, tomorrow I'm actually going to be streaming Alundra. I was wondering on whether or not I should react to some videos first and then do Alundra at times, but the way that like the capture cards work, I would need to essentially just stop the stream anyway and like close OBS and reopen it. So I would essentially be making 2 streams regardless. So I think it might just make the most sense to just purely stream the game. And if you guys aren't interested in that, I totally understand, and I appreciate you all dropping by anyway. But for anybody who is very interested, or somewhat interested in a less known game that's kind of like one of the best Legend of Zeldas that's ever made, that's not a Legend of Zelda, I highly recommend either checking it out yourself or looking at a video for it, because it is truly a really good game. Or so I think. Maybe it's just kind of like me looking in the past with rose-tinted glasses, and I might reevaluate those thoughts in the future. So I'm kind of curious to see how I feel about a game from 1997 in 2023. So anyway, that'll be it for me for tonight. And Stellaby? Okay. All right, no problem, Special Noob. You do that. And okay, that'll be it for tonight. Alundra tomorrow, beginning 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope to see you there. Last Protagonist out.